Timmy Dooley to make his statement under Standing Order 56. You have 35 minutes.
Thanks very much, Laska Hillock, and I appreciate the opportunity to address this House on what is an important matter. I'd like to thank the deputies for seeking the opportunity for statements on fishing opportunities in 2026. I welcome the timely opportunity to discuss this important issue and indeed the concerns affecting the fisheries and the seafood sector. I welcome, as I said, the contributions of so many at the committee yesterday and look forward to a continued engagement today. I wish to reassure the Dáil that as Minister of State for Fisheries and Marine, I recognise the importance of maintaining a vibrant fishing sector, both for the communities that rely on them and the wider economy. Importantly, I also recognise that these same coastal communities are feeling dismay and despair at the outcome of the Fisheries Council in Brussels towards the end of last week. The despair is twofold. Firstly, being the actualisation of the total allowable catch being set at the headline ICES advice by the EU, particularly the resultant quotas for pelagic stocks, and secondly, that Ireland's invocation of the Hague preferences, which are a key element of our relative stability, was blocked by a group of larger member states, led by France and Germany, involving the Netherlands, and aided by Poland. The conclusions reached in Brussels are a culmination of bilateral and trilateral negotiations by the EU with third countries, then followed by the internal EU matters of the Baltics, Western Mediterranean and the EU main TAC and quota regulation, which covers stocks in the Atlantic, North Seas and adjacent waters, that includes the fish stocks of most relevance to Ireland. Most of the stocks covered by this regulation are shared with third countries, and that's predominantly the UK and Norway. There are only two stocks for which Ireland has quota, which are autonomous union stocks, sole in place in a location that's referred to as 7 BC, which is off Ireland's west coast. The TAC for these stocks have been set at 15 tonnes annually for 2024, 2025 and 2026, in line with ICES advice, and therefore were not under consideration in this proposal, which came to a conclusion early last Saturday morning. It is clear that the outcome of this year's December AGRIFISH Council will result in severely reduced fishing opportunities for 2026. The scientific advice upon which the Council's decisions were based reflects the impact of overfishing of mackerel in particular by certain third countries. The advised 70% reduction in the total allowable catch for mackerel is compounded by a 41% reduction in blue whiting and a 22% reduction in boarfish, and further reductions in FRAPs, or Dublin Bay prawns as they're known. Now, we were aware of these concerns for some time, as many in the House were, because we'd had a discussion both here and in the committee about this impending scientific advice, but it was effectively crystallised at the weekend, and therefore obviously it has created significant shocks to the communities that are most impacted and depend so much on fishing in the first instance, but the processing sector and all the supply chains that are very much part of the industry. Ireland's fishing opportunities for 2026 amount to approximately in excess of 120,000 tonnes, with an estimated first sale value of 205 million. And this represents a decrease of about 1/3, or 100 to 105 million in actual value, on the estimated value of the 25 quota. These figures reflect quota outcomes for Ireland across the main pelagic, demersal and FRAP stocks for 2026. As a result, while the overall scale of opportunity remains substantial, the distribution of quota across key stocks presents ongoing challenges for fleet planning, processing throughput and coastal communities that are highly dependent on specific fisheries. It is important that we don't focus our ire on the scientific advice here. The advice is merely reflecting years of overfishing by other countries, and we, the EU and specifically Ireland, are suffering the consequence. This question arises as to what we are going to do about it. Ireland has consistently called for action against those countries who overfish mackerel, given that Ireland holds the largest share of EU quota for mackerel in the Western Waters area. The devastating impact of the decline in this stock will be acutely felt by both the catching and the processing sector. On behalf of the Government, I have called for the EU to send a clear message that actions that threaten the sustainability of our shared stocks are not acceptable. At the recent AGRIFISH Council, the importance of a concentrated EU response was discussed by ministers, including the option of triggering the unsustainable fishing regulation. This is something that I have sought for some time, and it's something that I will continue to pursue. Even since the Council last week, we have seen questionable actions taken by other third countries in how we manage the mackerel stock in the North East Atlantic. As recently as Monday evening, Norway, the UK, Faroes and Iceland agreed without the EU on management arrangements for mackerel for 2026. The ICES headline advice is for 2026 at 174,357 tonnes, which would represent a 70% reduction in last year's activity. And this is based on a 50% probability that the stock will recover to a term referenced as BLIM in 2027. Now, just to define BLIM for the benefit of the record of the House, BLIM is defined as spawning stock biomass in the weight of the sexually mature fish in a population. BLIM means the level of spawning stock biomass below which recruitment, i.e. reproduction, is impaired or the stock dynamics are unknown. So despite this, however, the four parties, Norway, the UK, Faroes and Iceland, have agreed that the 2026 TAC should be 299,000 tonnes, and this is based on the alternative catch scenario given by ICES based on the application of what's referred to as the maximum sustainable yield rule, ignoring that the stock is below BLIM. And I think the really important thing about BLIM is that it's a term set which gives the best chance of the stock recovering. And I think that's something that we all want to see. We want to see conservation measures that ensures we have a long-term viability for our coastal communities and for our fishing stocks. When you deviate from that, you risk the potential for the ultimate elimination of a stock. We have a challenge now how we address this based on what were our partners up to now have done. So the higher catch is associated with a higher risk. As I said, the stock will not recover to BLIM in 2027 and may ultimately deplete the stock and take much longer to try to save it and therefore impact for a much greater period of time. The four-party agreement indicates that their combined share is 79.45%, which is equivalent to 238,000 tonnes and 37% above the headline advice of 174,000 tonnes. The EU will now have to make a decision whether it remains faithful to the ICES headline advice of 174,000 tonnes or takes its share of the higher figure of 299,000 tonnes. There are many issues to be carefully considered here. A higher TAC means more fish for our fleet, but the one issue we need to be mindful of is that overfishing by some third countries has led to the collapse of the stock, and a careful balance needs to be struck. This is Ireland's most important stock, and we need to sustain it in the long run. The impact of the scientific advice and resulting reductions in available quota, combined with Ireland not receiving its Hague preference quotas, will have significant operational and economic feasibility impacts on the seafood sector. The 2026 quota outcomes reflects the continued balancing act between maintaining viable fishing opportunities and protecting fish stocks in line with scientific advice under the Common Fisheries Policy. For Ireland, this reinforces the importance of maximising value from available quota and maintaining high standards of quality and market positioning. Finally, to address the non-application of Ireland's Hague preferences in the TAC and quota regulation. The Hague preferences were created to account for Ireland's underdeveloped fleet and to counter the impact of access to Irish waters provided to vessels of other EU nations. These amounts of fish allocated to Ireland from other member states protected our fishing fleet from periods of severely depleted stocks. You will be aware that regrettably a group of member states chose to block the invocation of Ireland's Hague preferences this year. I've already outlined the countries concerned. I'm extremely disappointed that these member states have chosen to block the protection of our fleet at our time of most need. And I did say at the Council that I felt it was comparable to an act of betrayal by colleagues of the fundamental terms and conditions of an insurance policy that has been paid for in fish by Ireland since 1983, and it's particularly upsetting that the charge has been led by those that benefited most from access to Irish waters every year since 1983. I know from discussions at the Council outcomes with the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Fisheries and the Maritime yesterday that you will share the concerns I have outlined today, that you are equally appalled at the actions of those other Member States and that you wish to know what actions will be taken. I want to acknowledge the support that I have had from the Irish seafood industry representatives over the past number of weeks. They have spoken as one and supported the approach that I have taken in discussions and negotiations. Now, there is an intensive schedule of work that has to be undertaken over the coming weeks, and I intend to work with colleagues in addressing that. I have, together with Minister Hayden and I, we have made it very clear that we intend to establish a task force under the auspices of the Food Vision Strategy to advance a framework of supports to the seafood sector. A key priority for the Food Vision Seafood Group will be to ensure that a framework of economic, environmental and social sustainability supports is available to the fisheries and seafood processing sector and their coastal communities. And obviously we want to prioritise that work now and ensure that we move quickly to get that up and running. The group will be chaired by an independent chair and will include representatives from the fishing organisations, aquaculture and the seafood processing organisations. The Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine and its agencies and other relevant government departments and agencies will form a very significant part of that. And as I said, it is going to have an intensive schedule of work in the early stages to get it up and running. I want to see an interim report delivered in the first quarter of next year. I expect the first meeting of this group to start in early January and begin its work. And as I mentioned at the committee yesterday, I intend to seek some external support to augment our department capabilities to ensure that the matter gets the priority that it deserves. I'm conscious that this will be required, that additional resources will be required to carry this out. I've already had a conversation on a number of occasions with the Minister for Public Expenditure, Chambers, and Minister Hayden and I have had his support in this regard, and we do intend to move quickly on it. And Minister Hayden is here. He has been tremendous support to me in my work over the last number of weeks and has been available to use his influence, which is very considerable at European level, to try to get the best possible outcome. And we're committed to working in unison through this particular period of time. We intend to appoint Michael Berkery as the independent chair. Michael has been a well-known figure in the Irish agri sector. Michael has made very significant contributions to Irish agriculture and to the agri-food sector, notably as CEO of the Irish Farmers Association for 25 years, where he excelled in policy shaping and improving farmers' prospects. He was uncompromising in his pursuit of farming interests and is renowned for his exceptional political judgment and negotiating skills. These skills were harnessed through major CAP reforms and World Trade Organization negotiations, cementing his role as a pivotal figure in the Irish agriculture history. Michael understands the needs of rural and coastal communities. He's been a tireless champion for rural communities. He brings enormous experience to dealing with politicians, senior civil servants, government departments, state agencies and the European Commission. He is alert to the EU and national exchequer funding and indeed the relevant EU and national legislation and indeed the constraints imposed by EU state aid rules by the European Commission. And I look forward, together with Minister Hayden, in building a number of other individuals as part of that committee, and I'd certainly be happy to take any thoughts or views that members of this House have in formulating that response or that task force to address the very significant crisis that we know we're facing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. No further on that side. Deputy McLaughlin, please.
Ceann Corner. So, Minister, we obviously had the chance at the committee yesterday to go through what a disaster this outcome is and how it cannot stand. The Common Fisheries Policy has been deeply unfair to Ireland's fishing and coastal communities throughout the years. What happened with Brexit has been described rightly as a betrayal of those communities. It was a power grab, and I'm going to deal with some of the companies that are at the heart of this very soon. But what happened at the Fisheries Council has to be now, Minister, the final insult. There has to be a complete change in approach from our government in dealing with our European partners when it comes to the Common Fisheries Policy. It is so serious. Let's start with the Hague preferences. So the Hague preferences were put in place in 1976. Their origin is Annex 7 of the EEC Council Resolution, 3rd of November 1976. And what they were in place for, it was for Ireland and Britain, was to, as a quid pro quo in relation to access to our waters. Our waters has given huge wealth to fishing fleets across Europe, some of the richest fishing waters in the world. The Hague preference is central to that. That was a veneer of fairness, and it was deployed from time to time over the years where necessary. To suggest that the Hague preferences can just be done away with is absolutely unacceptable. And I am saying to you, Minister, you must use every single legal instrument available to you to challenge this. The Member States who united to block us invoking the Hague preferences know very, very well this isn't about taking fish away from them. This is about a balance for all the fish that they have taken from our waters over the years. They know that very, very well. And I believe that, unfortunately, there has been a meek response from Irish governments. I don't include you in that, Mr. Dooley, but before you, it was a meek resistance to what was happening for too many years, and they believe that can continue. You need to prove them wrong, Minister. That you need to prove them wrong that they can't do this. So let's talk about why it was that the Netherlands, France, Germany, Poland united together to outrageously attack our fishing and coastal communities when they know what happened after Brexit. They know that we took the biggest hit from Brexit. Burden sharing never happened. They know that, and they would do that to us. Minister, it was said yesterday by my colleague, Deputy McGuinness, and I absolutely agree with him, you need to bring every single ambassador from those 4 countries in to meet you urgently. You need to make it clear what they did is seen as an attack on our people by a member state, and I'm going to tell you why I believe they did it. I want to talk now about the Big Five. So the Big Five are referred to as an extremely powerful oligopoly. These are corporations that cooperate together, work together, that have a collective value of 2.4 billion. It's estimated that they, by buying up quota all across the European Union, have 1 in 6 of the fish caught under their control. They're absolutely huge. At the centre of this, and I'm going to name them, Parlevliet and Van der Plas, Cornelis Vroyluk, Van der Swan, Alda Seafood, and the De Boer family. But the big one is Parlevliet and Van der Plas. Let's talk about them. So when I talk about this, the Big Five, there has been much reportage of this. This is not a secret. It's widely known. Here's the report. Here's the report just from earlier this year. Absolutely damning report into the actions of these corporations. But at the centre of it, as I say, is Parlevliet and Van der Plas. And here's a report from a couple of years ago, Follow the Money, which did an expose on the massive control this company has, led by Dick Parleviat. So this company is valued at 1.5 billion. That's probably conservative because there's a lack of accountability around quota allocation across Europe. Nobody can tell us who actually has it with definitively. But it's estimated 1.5 billion. This is the biggest fish company in all of Europe. Huge influence. The Big Five, it's estimated, control 230 vessels. They own some of the biggest super trawlers. Actually, not some, the biggest super trawlers in the world. When you look up our coast, our west coast, you see these super trawlers literally vacuuming up the fish in our waters. This has been going on for far too long. Minister, I'm asking you, firstly, to take every single legal action at your disposal to challenge what happened with the Hague preferences. It cannot stand. It just cannot stand. But you must also call out the Big Five, and particularly this company, Parleviat and Van der Plas. It is no doubt that these 5 companies, but particularly P&P and the abbreviation, they had more influence over the actions of Germany, France and Poland and their own country, Netherlands, than our own country. The lack of respect for a fellow member state that was suffered so egregiously after Brexit, a country that has been struggling so much with our decline in allocation of fish quota, is outrageous. But it gets worse than just what happens within the European Union. These companies have huge interests in Iceland and the Faroe Islands. So the reckless overfishing that has led to the mackerel species being on the precipice, these companies have benefited from that too. They also benefit from the deal with Norway to get access to the cod because they have interests there. Everywhere you turn, these corporations are winning through. This is corruption. This is corruption. This is a fundamental attack on our democracy in the European Union. Our government cannot stand for it. Our government must stand up and speak loud about what is happening here. Have no doubt about it that what took place in the Fisheries Council was utter corruption, where corporations that have united together using the weaknesses, the fundamental flaws of the common fisheries policy to buy up quota, to recklessly overfish through Iceland and the Faroe Islands. And then, of course, with their interests in Britain. They have huge interests in Britain. So what's happened in recent days? Iceland, the Faroe Islands, Norway and UK have united together and made an agreement about mackerel. But they didn't pay any heed to the science. This agreement is way below what's been agreed at the Fisheries Council. So again, Minister, I ask, what are you going to do about that? Britain has signed up to the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. They must be aligned to the common fisheries policy. How can they make a deal and enable recklessness and then benefit from a deal with the European Union? So there has to be consistency here. So let's be clear to summarise. We have our fishing and coastal communities decimated. Decimated. They were the rule takers. They played by the rules. They followed the science. We have a small number of corporations based in the Netherlands, massive corporations that have huge influence over member states. This is not environmentally friendly policy. This is not about that. This is not about what the common fisheries policy states in terms of social and economic impacts being considered by every member state before they allocate quota. It's stitched into the common fisheries policy. So what's happened here is an outrageous attack on our sovereignty, an outrageous attack on our people. And my final point is this, the time I have left. I want to draw your attention again to the Supreme Court decision of 2016, the Barlow versus the Minister decision. It is clear from that decision that the Supreme Court says that Article 10 means that we do have control over our waters as well as other natural resources. I'm asking you to get legal advice about what happened with the Hague preferences, to get legal advice about Article 10, the Supreme Court ruling, and to take legal action to defend our interests. It's not going to be enough to set up a task force. It's not going to be enough, and of course it's needed, absolutely needed, financial resources. But when these boats in a number of years' time need to go back to fish, there needs to be fish there. So, Minister, do everything you can.
Deputy Conor D. McGuinness.
Caimé leabhart ar gáchúisna agus ar gácheist agus is sin na quotaí agus an tionachar acnamíochta cuis chósta a chomála sin mar dhearr ceannas agus údarás agus cuacht na hÉireann thar ar bharagaí féinnig. Tá breis is nócha fan géad ar gríoch mar stát site ar a bharige ach is fíormheog an smacht atá going ar na héis go bhaint ar astí. Thar na blianta faoi rialacha an cóbhhartas iascaig tá ceart sin tug a bhaing de réir a chéile. Tá tíre eile ag buint tarbha as iscí na hÉireann agus ní díreach tíre san Aontas Eorpach. Agus fágach orníos gurí féin ar an nimel i gcónaí, sin an iarna lam a ara. Is léir ó méid atá táirlathe an sá gur beag meáchan atá i gcon na hÉireann nuair a hagan brú idirnáisiúnta i gceist. Ní ceist teicnicúla bhánaí seo, is ceist politúlaí. Is léir a rís eile nach bhfuil ceannas ceart a going ar nachfaní le dúrtha féin agus gurb iad pobl bheoga cuis chósta a échan an phrais. Tá tionachar ar le ar na gintí seo ar geantar Gaeltachta. I glóir dus na counter son is í an na héascarí cnámh drama an géalagar áitiúil. So beag druch ar tionachar académiachta ag na cintí seo. Agus níl rána fostíochta eile ar fáil go héasca in annacha dus na counterchaí seo. Nuair a leidítar cótaí ní a bhain go gailtar an income. Cailtar daoine óga, cailtar tailig, agus legiatar an ghailge mar hanga phobal. Is ceist hanga agus cultúr is seo chomá le ceist achnamíochta. Tá statisticí sa léire ann a thugan léirgus ar seo. Tá cuid mór den na counter Gaeltacht a cósta a measc an geantar is lochalí ó thaobh diostíochta agus i dtaobh imirceide. Nuair a imíonn an obair ón bharige leanan an imirce í. Agus sin bagart díireach ar inmhónacht na Gaeltachta. Ní féidir leis an rialtas a rá go bhfuil siad ag takeú leis an Gaeling, agus ag an nám céine ag ghlacha le bartas agus scrusan banús académiachta na geantracha sin. Tá sé ráta ag na agriochtaí éascaige ara go soléir go bhfuil tep ar struchtúra an cóbhhartas éascaig. Tá sé ráta goingne ag an gcuiste, tá sé ráta ag mo choglachaí Pádraig McLachlan chomá. Ein tíam leis méid a ráta ag na hagrish éascaig. Ach téim céim níos fuide. Is ceist ceannas í seo. Mna bhfuil an cuacht a going ar nachfaní a chosant an son be mi de gcónaí ag lé leis na híormharca céine. Laidathe géirchéimena agus pobl a bhágáil ar lár. Agus ar a caiimar seasamh politiúla chhlacha ar son na tíre sin, agus be mína ar an taobh seo ag takeú leat má dhéanann tú amhlaigh. Caithfar a rágus soléir nach féidir leis an bobbal cosint leanúnt a ráig ag íoc as aspa smachta agus cothramis ar le bhéal na hórapa. Tá athrú tro omláin ag tastáil inis agus tá sé i bhfad thar ama. The outcome of the recent common fisheries policy negotiations represents one of the most severe shocks, if not the most severe shock the Irish fishing industry has faced in its existence. And it wasn't a sudden collapse, as we know. It was the final shove in a long process of decline that government parties have managed, excused and normalised. And what was already fragile has now been pushed dangerously close to a point of no return. And that is the responsibility, Minister, of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and successive administrations. And the scientific advice is stark. We acknowledge that. Proposed reductions of around 70% for mackerel, deep cuts to blue whiting and significant reductions across other North Atlantic species and indeed prawns in the Irish Sea. Sinn Féin accepts that science must guide fisheries management. There's no dispute over that. But stock sustainability matters. But also justice and fairness matters. And science doesn't answer the political questions at the heart of this particular crisis. Who's breaking the rules? Who's overfishing shared stocks? And why is it always Irish fishermen? Why is it always Ireland's coastal communities that are expected to pay the price? And you said yesterday at the committee meeting, and I agreed with you, Minister, that our waters cannot sustain the level of fishing, of overfishing, that has been undertaken for years by the EU fishing fleet. Correct. We agree. No dispute there. But it can definitely sustain the fishing
effort of Irish fishing boats. And that's where the priority must be, and that is where the injustice in all this lies. Irish fishermen are complying with the rules and suffering the consequences. Meanwhile, states including the Netherlands, Germany, France and Poland coalesce to protect their own interests, and as we've just heard from Deputy McLaughlin, the interests of a very small number of multinational corporations that play hard and fast with the rules and play hard and fast with our democracies, and I'll say it, the rule of law in many cases. They vote down safeguards for Ireland and they consolidate their advantages in the interests of those few corporations. And Deputy McLaughlin has already used parliamentary privilege to name those Dutch corporations and the extraordinary control that they exercise over Irish fishing opportunities, but over the entire EU process, and if we're being honest, over negotiations between EU and third countries where they also have economic presences. And this is something that cuts to the core of our democracy and of European democracy. And there's not many people in the chamber, but it should send a chill down the spine of everybody who has any interest in the environment, in the rule of law, in democracy or fairness. Because this government has allowed Irish sovereign natural resources to be effectively gifted, not even by us in Ireland, not by Irish people, but by foreign governments, to effectively gift our natural resources that are there for our generations, but also future generations, to private corporations. And it's not partnership, and it's not the economy. It's an abdication of responsibility, and it is an affront to our sovereignty as a nation. The scale of the damage is already clear: a projected loss of 57,000 tonnes of quota in 2026 and an economic hit of up to 200 million a year. And I know there are various ways to quantify the monetary value of this, but there are estimates that put it at $1/5 billion. And more than 2,300 jobs are on the line now, Minister, as we face into Christmas. And that isn't lost on anyone in any single coastal community in Ireland. And there are families now wondering, their skippers, their boat owners wondering how they're going to meet the December repayments on their boats. There's crews, they're scared they're going to lose income, but really, they don't know if they'll be fishing in January. They don't know if they will have a berth on a boat come January. And processing plants are facing closure. And the idea may be that we can prevail upon some of these foreign registered trawlers and fishing operations to land their catch here. Well, they won't, because they know that we have the most extreme sea fisheries protection regime, and they can effectively get off scot-free in their own home ports. But they're not going to be coming here, and really should we be begging for scraps from the table? And through all of this, Minister, and this isn't a criticism that lands on your lap or Minister Hayden, but the absence of leadership from the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach has been glaring. It has been staggering. In other member states, heads of government intervene directly when national interests are threatened, and that leadership was not evident here. And as chair of the Oireachtas Committee on Fisheries and Maritime Affairs, I said this, and our committee looked for that, and I said it to the Taoiseach last Thursday. I asked him to pick up a phone, and I say he didn't lift his hand, Minister, to do anything, to support you, to have your back in these negotiations, and to support, more importantly, our coastal communities. And Ireland has been treated as a soft touch in this, and effectively this government, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Lowry Independents have allowed it to happen. And states that describe themselves as partners, that say all the nice things to us about solidarity and the European Union, and we're partners and member states, and we need to maybe relook at our neutrality, and we all need to step together at the European level. Well, they voted against us. They gutted us. They gutted you, Minister, at these negotiations. They blocked the Hague preferences, and they stripped away the only protection, the only modest protection designed to prevent exactly this kind of shock, and that is calculated insult heaped on existing injury, and it demands a response. Not quiet disappointment, not expressions of concern, not more hand-wringing. I'm calling for an immediate diplomatic and political response to signal Ireland's disgust at how we've been treated as a sovereign nation, and that means formal diplomatic démarches. It means calling in the ambassadors of states that actively undermined Irish fisheries and Irish sovereignty, and it means making clear that access to Irish waters cannot continue as if nothing has happened. There can be no more business as usual, and there are many avenues open to you, Minister, and open to this government, should they choose to go down them, that are within the bounds of the law, but that do exert economic and political pressure on our so-called partner countries. Ireland will shortly hold the presidency of the European Union, and that presidency must be used deliberately to untangle and undo this injustice, not to manage it, not to kick it to touch, but to reverse it. At European level, Ireland must reopen discussions with a clear demand for fair burden sharing and the restoration of protections for highly dependent member states such as Ireland, and that requires political will from the current Taoiseach. But ultimately, this comes down to political choice. The CFP must be judged not just on stock levels but on fairness and solidarity, and at present it is failing on all that. Our fishing communities have observed decades of loss. They've been patient, they've played by the rules, and their anger and their despair and their disappointment is justified, Minister. The injury is real, the insult is undeniable, and what happens next will tell us whether this government is prepared to stand up for the country or whether it is content to let another vital sector slide towards a fatal end.
Deputy Pearce Doherty.
Tan rialtas tar éis chip a ríist agus a ríist leir pobl costa agus tinscail iascarachta na héireann. Agus léiríonn an géiliú seo go bhfuil gantnas omlan siú sama ag Fianna Fáil agus a Fine Gael maidir le síalta agus scípethe na iascarí. Ní hasamh sibh suas ar a son a dhéamh agus ní hasamh suas ar a son a nes. Bag na gheibh dhéanúchain deirdaí mahéin na hasúin seo cés mór an Cavanagh díra leis an tíise. Ní ro cés ho riamh ho sáilear maidir le cadat a ceart agus cadat a mícheart. Seo ges a ág, sibblian na déag de ísinis, as aring mórí eile na má ar chosta gwynanáil. Ba iesgire a bhí na hair, a seanahar, agus a sin seanahar. Agus bín moran ag iesgaracht fásta. Gawin si manga le dún agus darú. Agus seo han legan is inhaí a iesgarachta at a on. Ach dúirt an rialtas líthe, go raibh go iesgarachta a néan an glí. Tá áthí anca má, ón seamra leapa, ó eileannéar an mhór ar na longanna móra as tíre eile ag genú scris ar an carchamaíochta a tar éis pobl costa a chothúid ar chonal agus ar fod na stáite seo ar féin na mílte bliana. Agus tá an cuma seo ar na mór chrálar seo ar nós gur ceithre buga iad. A bhád níos móna na bailte agus na sreidbailte buga ar chosta gwynanáil. Nuair na róir an rialtas an égar in éan mór an Cavanagh eiceil is léir na ró siad riamh chun sasú suas ar a son agus a phobal dá lihéid. This government has failed coastal communities and these have failed the fishing industry. And the latest capitulation is systematic of a complete lack of interest from Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael in the way of life, in the livelihoods of fishermen and women up and down this country. These have never, ever stood up for them, and that's the fact. Almost 2 years ago, I stood here and I directly put it to the Taoiseach, the case of young Maureen Kavanagh. Never has there been such a clear case of right and wrong. She's now a 16-year-old girl from Arnmore Island off the coast of Donegal. Her father was a fisherman, her grandfather was a fisherman, her great-grandfather was a fisherman. And Maureen also fishes. She catches pollock with hook and line, the most sustainable way of fishing. But she was told then by the government that her fishing was illegal. She was forced to watch from her bedroom in Arnmore Island at the foreign factory ships, destroying the balance that has sustained that coastal community and coastal communities right across the state in Donegal and elsewhere for thousands of years. These monster ships look like small cities. They dwarf the towns and villages along the coast of Donegal. And a government that couldn't see the injustice that was done to Maureen Kavanagh were never going to stand up for communities like hers. She wanted a future on this island, but that future has been denied to her. And then, when I raised this with the Taoiseach at the time, he accused me of dishonesty and spin. He said that it was for scientific reasons that Maureen couldn't fish pollock on a hook and line. But the problem is there's always winners and losers here. Maureen was the losers, the factory ships were the winners, and in this case here, it's the factory ships that are winners, and Irish fishing and coastal communities are the losers, again thrown to the wolves by this government. This system is completely rigged, and if Maureen Kavanagh is the problem, then the government really don't know and do not have fishing communities' backs. My colleague, Deputy McLaughlin, outlined it blow by blow, the corporate interests, the powerful lobbies that are at the heart of Europe, and a compliant Irish government nodding along. For anyone from a coastal community in Ireland, it comes as no surprise that the government has failed to stand up for them again. But the scale of this failure cannot be overstated this time. This is not minor. The outcome of the most recent EU Fisheries Councils is catastrophic. The fishing quotas agreement is a dark, dark day for the Irish fishing communities, and we're talking about jobs that are going to be lost. We're talking about livelihoods that are on the line. We're now seeing vessels that could be at sea for less than 10 days a year. Factories that once worked for 5 months a year down to 2 to 3 weeks. How can the government or any minister not know what this means and stand up for them? This means livelihoods destroyed. It's a hammer blow for coastal communities. It's communities right along Donegal, from Greencastle right down to Kellybegs. It is jobs that are going to be lost. And the common fisheries policies has been undermined again and again by big businesses allowed to pursue their interests unchecked. So I finish on this here. This is not the time to roll over, as Deputy McGuinness says. This is the time to stand up. This is the time to have fishing communities' backs. This is the time to stand up for our sovereignty and our rights. And this is the time for the Taoiseach to finally show up and make his voice heard on this issue.
Owen Kenny.
Minister, I want to speak firstly in relation to the grave concerns in the fishing industry with the announcement of the new deal from the EU on fishing opportunities for 2026. The loss of 57,000 tonnes of quota will without doubt have a hugely detrimental impact on the over 2,300 jobs in the industry. The Seafood Ireland Alliance has said that they expect somewhere between 100 and 200 million euro loss in value for 2026. Those are staggering figures and will have caused great concern and distress for those working in the sector in recent days. The knock-on effects of this deal will be far-reaching for coastal towns and communities across Ireland. Much like other agricultural industries in Ireland, the fisheries sector provides a platform for other sectors beyond its own. Local businesses, suppliers, restaurants will feel the effects of these changes. Costs of produce will increase, the cost of transportation and procuring stock will increase. These costs will cause serious difficulties for small businesses, and invariably increases will be passed on to consumers, and those working in the industry will see figures rise while their wages continue to remain stagnant. I have to say, news coming from the European Union between this deal and the proposed Mercosur deal does not provide much hope for communities that rely so much on the fisheries and agricultural sectors. When the ordinary worker in these industries looks at these proposals, when the consumer looks at these proposals, they can rightly wonder, are we considered in any of the high-up decision-making processes? The Labour Party will work constructively with Government to advocate for a fair and equitable fisheries policy that prioritises the livelihoods of Irish fishermen and women and the sustainability of our Marine Institute. Minister, I want to take this opportunity again on this floor to raise the backwater fish kill. This was an ecological disaster on a scale we have never seen before in my hometown. And I have to say both myself and anglers across the Munster region have little faith that this issue is being taken seriously by the state bodies involved. The River Blackwater was the scene of the greatest fish kill ever seen in this country. In excess of 40,000 fish were killed by a chemical irritant. This led to investigations by Inland Fisheries Ireland, the EPA, Cork County Council and the Marine Institute. With all these state bodies and local authority involved, not one had the optimum capacity or resources to identify the chemical, and thus the cause of responsibility of the kill has not been found. It is worth noting, although the source of the pollution is still unknown due to the lack of ability to identify the irritant, the North Cork Co-op Creamery in Kanturk came under scrutiny after the EPA published results of a site inspection conducted on the night of the fish kill. The findings revealed that over 362,000 litres of wastewater were discharged into the river within a 10-hour window, with ammonia levels up 52 times above the legal limits. Since then, the creamery has been made to suspend production due to this and a history of failure of consistently achieve compliance with its licensed discharge conditions. This isn't just a Kanturk or a Cork problem, and issues of pollution must be rigorously investigated and stamped out right across this country. If we're serious about protecting our environment, our rivers, our fish and our wildlife, then enforcement powers must be increased. Never once in this country was an EPA licence taken away. They must be withdrawn if constant pollution happens. We have had no sanctions or definitive answer for this, and to be frank, it makes a mockery of the idea that we have oversight. The bottom line is that we still do not know what killed upwards of 40,000 fish. This brings me on to Inland Fisheries Ireland. The programme for government includes a clear commitment to carry out a full review of Inland Fisheries Ireland. That commitment must now be honoured in full and without further delay. This cannot be allowed to drift on while serious governance issues remain unresolved, complaints go unanswered and staff concerns continue to be raised internally and externally. I'm sure, Minister, because you are the Minister, you would have seen the Public Accounts Committee meeting 2 weeks ago. As a member of that committee, it was deeply concerning to see basic governance and basic record keeping were all found wanting. This was not a minor oversight. It was a serious corporate governance failure. Following an answer to a parliamentary question from me last week, it emerged that 7 separate investigations took place within the IFI between 2021 and 2025. That is a significant number for an organisation of this size and should immediately raise alarm bells for yourself and the department. The issues I raised include the use of uninsured vehicles and the provision of false documentation to a staff member, which was then in turn passed on to An Garda Síochána. These are not trivial matters. They point to a culture where rules are treated as optional and where staff are placed in impossible positions because of management failures. The facts laid before the committee 2 weeks ago were absolutely shocking by the IFI. A staff member of the IFI who was involved in a car crash in Donegal in August 2021. Following that accident, the IFI provided this employee with insurance documentation, which they later found out on the 16th of November 2021 to be completely inaccurate. Despite knowing this, they failed to inform either the member of staff or An Garda Síochána that the documentation was false. They knowingly allowed a staff member to proceed with paperwork that they knew to be invalid. The employee only learned that the insurance documentation was invalid when he received a solicitor's letter from the other party involved in the car crash. This is an appalling way to treat anyone and for anyone to learn that an employer has exposed them to legal and personal risk. The bottom line is clear. The IFI knowingly failed to inform the Gardaí or their own staff member that a vehicle that they had was uninsured. This is disgraceful and completely inexcusable. Workers should never have to endure such an ordeal. The hearing added even more troubling revelations, Minister. The acting chief executive told the committee before the break of the committee that he knew nothing of the findings of the external investigation commissioned by former Minister Eamon Ryan. Yet after the break of the committee meeting, he acknowledged that he was in attendance in the February 2025 board meeting where those findings were presented. While the findings may not have been discussed in detail, he failed to disclose that he knew that they had been received. It appeared he believed he could go through the entire committee meeting without acknowledging this. That is simply unacceptable. At the end of that committee meeting, former Deputy CEO, acting Deputy CEO, and now Head of Finance, revealed that she had carried out a review of the report that the IFI had received in February 2025. Minister, I'm calling on you to be brave with the IFI. Let this be your legacy in the Department of Fisheries. Do not let them continue in this vein. They have lost my support, they have lost the support of anglers, they have lost the support of the general public in this country. The IFI, as an organisation, Minister, needs to be disbanded and built up from the root again, because it's a failed organisation, and do not put people in senior positions of the IFI who have been involved in controversy, because this, Minister, will be the legacy of the IFI and of fisheries in this country. And this is an opportunity for you, Minister, to get the confidence of anglers back, because the confidence of anglers is not there. So give it that opportunity now, Minister. Build the IFI back up to an organisation that can be trusted by members of the public. I want, Minister, for you, as I said from the outset, the horizon right now does not look bright for those working in the fisheries sector, or anglers, or those who use our water. But, Minister, you have the opportunity now to change that. I actually know you will, because I know you want to. And you will do it because you'll know that it will have great effect to this country and to those who use our rivers.
Thanks very much, Ceann Comhairle. Ministers, I want to draw your attention to very serious concerns over a multiplicity of issues brought to my attention by fishers. I represent Clogherhead in County Louth. Last month, you'll be aware that a trawler sank off Bettystown. 2 Egyptian fishers in difficulty were rescued by the Coast Guard helicopter and the Clogherhead lifeboat. But this isn't an isolated case. It's the 6th such incident in recent times. And there is a very concerning pattern. Exactly 2 years ago, an Egyptian fisher lost their lives on a capsized vessel, the Ben Thomas, off Doonaney Point in Dundalk Bay. And the recent Marine Casualty Investigation Board report into the fatal incident is absolutely damning. It says a number of things, and I'll read from it now. Issues involved inadequate safety systems, the failure to wear personal flotation devices, the failure of the life raft to inflate, the delayed activation of the vessel's emergency position indicating radio beacon, the absence of personal locator beacons for crew, prolonged cold water immersion in temperatures of approximately 9 degrees centigrade. The other crew member survived, but he had hypothermia. The stress signal at the time of sinking wasn't made. This delayed, obviously, the emergency response. The MCIB report raised concerns about safety management practices, including the lack of documented handover procedures when the vessel changed operators weeks before the incident. Critically, insufficient crew induction and training is a big problem, expired safety equipment, and the absence of vessel-specific stability awareness. And actually, I could go on. But none of this is new to me, and none of this is new to the experienced fishers in Clogherhead. And in recent months, local fishers with whom I've met, people who have fished these waters for absolute generations, safely, sustainably, and with health and safety at the forefront of their minds, they brought a raft of associated concerns to me about how the fishery in our area is being exploited by vessels with majority non-EEA crews. And you know that this is against the regulations, Minister. They have serious concerns about how these boats are being operated and about the safety and training of the crew boarding these vessels and operating these vessels. They showed me evidence of boats registered to people with no connection whatsoever to the fishing industry, no direct experience in the industry. Vessels registered at residential addresses that simply don't stack up. People whose known businesses, for example, home refurbishment and other such work, they're now for some reason registered as trawler owners. The authorities need, Minister, to be asking more serious questions of some of the newer arrivals to the sector. It's also alleged that on many of these boats, basic health and safety and training and regulatory requirements, basic statutory minimum requirements, are not being met, as well as very substantive claims, in my view, of potential overfishing, routine breaches of working time at sea legislation, and other regulations that put the future of the fishery itself, in fact, at risk. Now, I've met this year with representatives from a range of different organisations, the WRC, the SFPA and the Revenue Commissioners, and I've shared with them the concerns and some details with them, the concerns expressed to me by the Clogherhead fishers. And on Garda Síochána, quite frankly, need to take a serious interest in what's going on too. Now, we're assured that they're all doing their jobs individually and collectively. And I know that a risk-based approach is taken by all of the agencies, and a multi-agency approach is taken to issues in relation to the regulation of the industry. And I have some experience of this. I mean, one of the last things I did when I was a minister was bring in the new non-EEA permit scheme for migrant fishers in the context of an international journalistic investigation that was going on at the time, and that exposed some of the conditions of non-EEA share fishermen operating in the industry. And so I'm familiar with what happens. I've represented the Clogherhead fishermen for many, many years. But in my view, Minister, the authorities need to act, and they need to start asking more difficult, more searching questions based on the information that's been disclosed, not just to me, but to them as well. And there needs to be evidence and action in terms of the agencies and their response to these issues. They can't claim ignorance of these issues. There's a pattern of behaviour here, and it needs to be properly understood and properly examined. This time 2 years ago, actually this very week 2 years ago, I was supporting members of the Egyptian community in Drogheda who were dealing with their grief when their fellow countryman was taken by the sea off Doonaney Point. And we need fisheries that are operated well, that favour as well experienced, skilled operators, many of whom working in that fishery for generations, who always play by the rules. And we need evidence that work is ongoing, that potential rogue operators will be rooted out. We know that lives have been lost in that fishery in recent years. I referred to the case this time 2 years ago. Lives were almost lost off Bettystown at the end of November. Lives are being put at risk, and honest livelihoods are being put at risk as well. And the next Ben Thomas, or the next Graceful Morning, the vessel that sank off Bettystown, an occurrence like that is just around the corner, unless the unsafe and, in my view, at times illegal practices that appear to me to be tolerated for too long are weeded out. We need to weed those practices out, and in doing so, that's how we properly support the fishers who have been working in those fisheries for many, many years and who put health and safety and the regulatory environment in which they operate first at all times. Lives are at risk and action is needed.
Thank you, Deputy Nash. Now we have back to the Government, Minister Christopher O'Sullivan.
Thank you very much, Count Corla. And I start by acknowledging the efforts of Minister Timmy Dooley. I've been working with him over the last number of months, meeting with fishing sector representatives. I know how many times he's travelled back and forth to Europe to try and get some type of coalition, try to get countries on board in terms of, at the very least, invoking those Hague preferences. And he did what he could, because he used his vote in the way that he should have in order to try and ensure that the Hague preferences came through. But as we know, there was a betrayal, and this is the word that he's used himself. And I just want to acknowledge your efforts, Mr. Dooley, in that regard. But this was a betrayal, and when you consider the fact that the same countries who have sought to block this measure that Ireland has necessarily benefited from over previous years, these are the same countries that gain significant access to Irish waters. And to the extent and to the detriment of our own fleet. And this is what makes this all the more galling and all the more painful for the Irish fishing sector. For many of the species that were previously abundant around Irish waters, Ireland has, because of the common fisheries policies, paid a significant price, has not benefited from the quota share that should have been the case over previous years. If you take species like Hague, where it was only 6%, haddock at times was down 10% or below. Monkfish, again, a species that is caught off Irish waters, sometimes down around 7%. And then sole in the Irish Sea, for example, right off the Irish coast, you're talking about a percentage of about 5%. And then obviously you see the cut in blue whiting again, which was once abundant off Irish waters. You see a cut of 40% because of scientific advice. So it's clear, and I don't think anyone necessarily is in disagreement, the common fisheries policy has not worked for the Irish fishing sector. When you consider the rich fishing grounds, the previously rich abundance of these species in Irish waters. But at least with those smaller quotas, we had the ability to invoke Hague preferences. And unfortunately, because of the acts of a few nations who have, and Minister Dooley's been very clear in terms of where he stands on that, and hasn't been afraid, and I admire that, has not been afraid to call out these actions. We haven't even been able to benefit of to avail of the benefit of the Hague preferences. I want to commend the fishing sector's response here, because while they're disappointed, while they're probably angry, while they're frustrated, they haven't once questioned, at least to my knowledge, the scientific advice. They appreciate the importance of protecting these species. They appreciate the importance of protecting the stocks. They know that they have to listen to the scientists. But what really galls them in this situation is that fact that other third nations completely ignore and disregard the scientific advice. And that is really the core of the issue here. Yes, EU nations have enjoyed a significant, large quota share, especially of species that are caught in Irish waters. But the actions of third nations, in terms of their pillaging of these species and disregard for scientific advice, is the real core of the issue here. And this is important, and this is, of course, I'm speaking here today on behalf of the fishing sector in West Cork, in places like Kinsale, Union Hall, Castletownbere, who are impacted by this, but also as Minister with responsibility for biodiversity, who, when you have countries like this ignoring scientific advice, this doesn't just injure what could be a thriving fishing sector in Ireland, it also impacts biodiversity, it impacts cetaceans, it impacts marine wildlife that rely on these species as well. So the pelagic sector, the polyvalent sector, the whitefish sector, and the inshore sector, and we have to mention the impact that this is going to have on what could be a vibrant, sustainable inshore sector in Ireland. This will be felt right throughout the entire sector, because once species like mackerel and blue whiting, when their quotas are cut to such an extent, it causes displacement. The fishing sector, rightly so, is going to have to look for alternative stock and species to catch. So this will cause issues right throughout the sector. And that's why, Minister, and I know you said it, I know you're committed to it, and I know that you will be meeting the Taoiseach and Jack Chambers, as will I, to ensure that there are adequate financial supports put in place, as Deputy McLaughlin has said, to get them through this incredibly difficult period for the fishing sector. It's tough because we know that as an island nation, with a relatively small fleet, we could have a vibrant, sustainable fishing sector. Sustainable in terms of jobs, sustainable in terms of those participating in fishing, but also sustainable from a nature and biodiversity point of view. And we have to call it out, the common fisheries policy is not serving us in that respect. So I'll finish on this to commend you again, Mr. Dooley. I know you've been working and meeting with not just the fishing sector, but opposition members as well. And I know that you are, as you said, at committee and at every stage, you're listening to the fishing sector and you're working for them and you want to get the results for them. So you have my full support in ensuring that we get the appropriate financial measures, that the task force is supported in identifying what those financial measures are and how they should be distributed. And you certainly have my full support, because we need this result for the coastal communities right around Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. And we now move to Sinn Féin slot. Deputy Martin Kenny.
Minister, we're in a very difficult situation for coastal communities right around the whole Irish seaboard, and we see that the situation from the Fisheries Council has put us in an absolutely devastation, is all it can be described as, and it's going to be catastrophic for the Irish fishing industry over the next year and further out. We see that the betrayal really of the fishing community is something that has gone on probably now for decades, and that's the reality, and that's something we hear when we talk to fishers right around the whole coastline, particularly inshore fishers and the people who are struggling to make a living and fishing very sustainably, as has been said earlier, and yet they're the ones that will meet the brunt of much of this. It's estimated the fishing industry, it puts almost 2,500 coastal jobs in the fishing industry at risk. And the immediate danger is there and is clear. We're looking at approximately 57,000 tonnes less quota, which will be almost €100 million worth to the industry being lost. The wider economic impact could reach up to €200 million, with coastal communities right around the entire seaboard, from here in Howth right down Wexford, right over Castletownbere, all the way up to Killybegs. This is a huge impact on rural communities that are struggling the most. And that's, I think, something that can't be lost. And it's happening because we have these large vessels coming in from other countries around Europe, and particularly, really, this is an international corporation that is driving this, and they're just sucking up the fish. And they're doing it in the most unsustainable way you could possibly imagine. And the impact of that is that the science is telling us that we're now in a stage where we see much of the fishing stock being depleted to a very dangerous state. Nobody is arguing that. The problem we have here is that the other sector which is in a catastrophic situation is the Irish fisherman and fisherwoman. And they're going to be suffering as a consequence of the greed of major corporations. And that is, I suppose, one of the big problems that very, very many people in Ireland and indeed across Europe have with the European Union itself. That it seems to be that it is the rich and the powerful that can make all the decisions, and the ordinary people are left to carry the can. You know, well, it's time these people were left to carry their own bloody can, because the ordinary people can't take it any longer, and certainly the fishing communities around the Irish coast can't take it any longer. And they'll simply be devastated because of this. And Minister, I acknowledge, you know, that efforts were made and that you feel you were betrayed in all of this. But what we don't understand is that the leadership of government, that the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach did not step up to the plate here. They did in other countries in the European Union, but they did not step up to the plate here, and they did not come in strongly to support rural fishing communities around Ireland. And we're left in a situation now where it is simply going to be devastating if this is allowed to stand. And Minister, what we need is government, and you have the support of everyone in the House, you know, but we need government to make a strong stand for fishing communities. And unfortunately, I have to say, from the perspective of us looking at it, that has not happened to date. And that has to change. So, Minister, I expect that over the Christmas period and when we start into the new year, that we will see a change in how government approaches this entire industry, that we will have the industries back, that government will step forward and will make a strong stand for the communities that have been devastated by the greed of a small number of corporations, international corporations who have links and who actually seem to be more powerful than Ireland when it comes to this. And, you know, the concept of the European Union where everyone would work together for the benefit of all seems to be set aside when it comes to these corporate interests. And the way in which they are able to wield their power and the huge lobby that they have in Brussels and other places is absolutely devastating for ordinary communities around the country. I also see it in the agriculture sector when it comes to Mercosur. It's the very same thing. The big business, the big corporates, they're driving it forward, and to hell with everyone else. Well, governments have a responsibility to the people that elect them, to the people who out there who need reassurance that they can have a future too, and that all cannot be stolen from their plate. So, Minister, I appeal to you and I appeal to government to step forward, to make that strong stand, to recognise the devastation that this has for this fishing communities and for other communities in coastal areas, because this is going to affect a huge amount of jobs. I mean, our processing industry can't survive on 3 or 4 weeks' work a year. Those factories are simply going to close. So, Minister, this is an opportunity for government to really show its grit, and it must do that.
Thank you, Deputy Jennifer Whitmore.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. Minister, Irish seas have been sold and our coastal communities are paying the price. Our seas are among our most valuable natural resources, yet they are being exploited under a system that fails to protect coastal communities, marine biodiversity and the long-term sustainability of our fisheries. The presence of Norwegian, Icelandic and Faroe Islands vessels in Irish waters is a stark reminder of how weak our current controls are and how urgently they need reform. Foreign fleets now catch approximately 85% of all fish landed from Irish waters. Despite controlling about 12% of EU waters, Ireland receives less than 6% of the quotas. For decades, successive governments have treated our fishing industry as expendable. When Ireland joined the EEC in 1973, our marine resources were traded away so that other sectors could benefit, and that betrayal, unfortunately, continues today. Just this week, Irish fishers learned that they will forfeit even more of their already depleted quota, another blow to rural and coastal jobs caused by government indifference, and particularly EU indifference and EU deals that serve everyone but us. At the EU Agriculture and Fisheries Council meeting last week, a deal was struck that will see Ireland lose 57,000 tonnes of quota for 2026, a loss valued at around 94 million, rising to 200 million in knock-on effects, threatening approximately 2,300 coastal jobs. These foreign fleets often target high-value species like blue, whiting and mackerel, operating under quota arrangements negotiated at EU level. While these deals are presented as reciprocal, the reality is Ireland gains little compared to what we give away. Our own fishers face strict quotas and shrinking margins, while foreign super trawlers, some the size of football pitches, extract enormous volumes of fish from Irish waters. And this is not just an economic injustice, it is an environmental and a social one. Industrial-scale fishing puts pressure on stocks, disrupts ecosystems and undermines the sustainability commitments we claim to uphold. The Hague preferences, something that exists to protect our fleet when there are periods of severe quota downturn, should have been invoked for Ireland at this meeting. And I do want to acknowledge at this point, Minister, the work that you have done at Europe to try get our neighbours to invoke that. Unfortunately, as others have said, I think that you could have done with more support from more senior levels, but I do appreciate the work that you put into it. The triggering criteria was met for the Hague preferences, yet a group of EU member states who have larger fishing fleets in Ireland blocked that. This represents the first time that the Hague preference has been blocked in 50 years, blocked by our neighbours. This is an issue of sovereignty and it is an issue of fairness. Coastal communities in Donegal, Galway and Cork depend on fishing for livelihoods, yet they are squeezed by policies that prioritise corporate interests and international deals over local resilience. Rural Ireland is hollowing out. Clubs can't field teams and young people are emigrating because government after government has sacrificed fisheries for short-term gain. Better controls do not have to equal isolationism. We need stricter monitoring of foreign vessels, real-time reporting of catches and enforcement that ensures compliance with sustainability standards. Ireland should push for a renegotiation of quota sharing arrangements so that benefits flow back to Irish communities, not just to multinational operators. Investments in our own processing capacity and small-scale fisheries would create jobs and keep value local rather than exporting it along with the fish. At a time when climate and biodiversity crises demand urgent action, continuing to allow industrial fleets unfettered access is indefensible. Ireland must stand up for its marine resources, its workers and its environment. Stronger controls are not just a policy choice, they are a matter of justice and the survival of our coastal communities rely on them. We need to see a return of the Hague preferences to Ireland and we need to see it now. We really cannot accept this from your Minister and I hope that you will fight very strongly for that. I do also want to talk about really what underpins our fisheries as well though, because I think it would be remiss not to talk about it. And earlier this week I heard another TD say that one of the issues that we have, one of the problems, is that for the first time Europe has actually accepted the scientific advice that was given to it, which squeezed the quotas even further. What I would actually say is that the fact that Europe for years has not accepted the scientific advice and have given out quotas that were way larger than what populations could withstand, that is one of the reasons that we are now in this situation. There are biological limits as to what we can fish. And I think when Europe is estimating the overall number and quota of fish, it absolutely has to use science and be led by science in that regard. I think within that framework, within that umbrella of what is available, I don't think Ireland has, and I don't think Ireland has ever received its fair share of that quota. But I absolutely accept that there does need to be a quota system that stays within the biological limits of the populations, because it just makes sense. If you overfish, if you don't have enough mature fish in a population, you will not have enough young fish coming along. And so, you know, I think that is a key thing. And I think really what we're seeing now are the impacts of overfishing by all countries. And Norway and the Faroe Islands and Iceland have an access to those stocks as well. But we are being squeezed from that perspective. And I think that is really regrettable, because I think for years we've ignored pure population realities when it comes to fish stocks. I think one of the impacts that we're going to see from this, and actually Minister O'Sullivan mentioned it, is the squeezing of our inshore fisheries. And I think that's something that we have to be really, really conscious of. I understand the government is coming up with a set of a package that will be available and very welcome for the larger fishers. But I think it's really important that inshore fisheries and people who fish inshore are protected, and that there isn't a further reduction of what's available to them, because they are already being squeezed. You know, and we were very aware of that. I also want to say, Minister, I think it is way past time that we see the marine protected area legislation. It's been promised for a long time, and you know, I know that you have changed the process. It will now, you know, be pulled in under the DMAP legislation, which I personally don't agree with. But we really need to see movement on that legislation, because it is only through marine protected areas will we protect our fish stocks, and our inshore and indeed offshore fishers. That is the only way. If we don't have fish, there's going to be no fishermen. That's just the reality. And I think it's really important that when this legislation is being developed, that those inshore fishers are incorporated, that it is very much a partnership with them. They are the ones who are really the custodians, similar to when we talk about farmers. They are the custodians of our marine resource. They're the ones that have the knowledge. You know, I would always be like, you know, really, you know, chatting to fishermen and hearing their stories. They're so in tune with what happens at sea, what's happening with different stocks, you know, and they can give you reasons why there's changes in the different stocks and why the dynamics may have shifted. And I think it's really important that we work with them. I think there's a real cultural element to this. I think, you know, for inshore fishers, for the islanders, I think it is a core part of who we are and who we were as a nation. I think we've sort of turned our face away from the marine far too much. And I think we need now to start appreciating and valuing our marine resources and making sure that they will be available not just to this generation of fishers, but the generation after and the generation after, because there is just so much of our cultural heritage tied up in those communities, and we really can't allow them to be diminished any further than they are. So, Minister, I would, you know, really ask that with the marine protected area legislation, and maybe you could fill us in when you're responding, but we need to know when that is coming to the committee, when we, you know, when we can start the engagement with the different stakeholders on it, and if you could give any aspect, like I think there's so many examples that we could look at where it was done well, and so many examples where it was not done well, and I think it's really important to learn from other countries. Like, interestingly, I've been engaged a little bit with some people in the marine sector in Florida, and a simple change in the size the size of particular fish that were unable to be caught, and this was driven by anglers actually, that they pushed for this legislation. A simple change in that size that were eligible to be caught, it has actually resulted in such life being brought back to the coast of Florida. It is just incredible. And to the point now where the state is now actually able to free up or lessen that regulation a little bit, because it has actually brought those seas back to life. And that's the thing. I think we need to look at these MPAs in some instances as a more sort of a short-term measure, a sort of emergency measure, to allow those areas to really get back to where they were, and then potentially look to, you know, allowing more fishing or allowing other activities in. But we need to deal with this like it's an emergency, because it really is. And it's not just from a biodiversity and nature, a tourism perspective, as we're seeing now. Fishers who rely on this for their livelihoods, whose fathers and fathers and fathers and fathers did, you know, like that life is at risk now, that way of living. And I think it's really important that we protect it, and I think the Marine Protected Area Bill is the way to do that. So look, I look forward to hearing your comments in relation to that, but I do want to acknowledge the work, Minister. I know you went over there with the absolute intention of being very firm and strong and winning that debate. Unfortunately, it would appear that our European neighbours weren't willing to work with us on that, which I think is unfortunate. But I do think there's other things that we can do to ensure and to push it as much as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Patrick O'Callagher.
Thanks, Alaskan Corda. And first of all, let me recognise in the gallery the representatives of the sector, whether it be the IFPO, Irish South and East, or IFPEA. They're here this evening, and that's significant. They're extremely concerned. They spent most of last week in Brussels, and they were there when the Minister met with them prior to the Council and during the Council to brief them fully. First of all, let me clear up this one. I submitted, as a result of the presentation by the Sea Fisheries Protection Authority in the Fisheries Committee a few weeks ago. And I felt it necessary to table a question to the Minister. It would have been Minister of Agriculture, Food and Marine, but of course would be dealt with in the office of the Marine Minister, Timmy Dooley, to ask the question, what were the plans to review the Sea Fisheries and Maritime Jurisdiction Act in view of the recent appearance of the Sea Fisheries Authority? And I wanted an answer to that. What about the review and an overhaul? And I have a reply. And the reply doesn't deal with the question. The reply tells me everything I knew about the Sea Fisheries Authority. But I would just say, Minister, would you insist that your staff and your department deal with the question that they're asked? And I'll leave it at that. This has been a very black week. And it's going to be a black year for the Irish fishing sector, 2026, with the drastic reduction in the quotas of demersal and pelagic fish. And why are we in this position? Of course there's overfishing. There's no overfishing by this country. And I can put my hand in my heart, and one who is involved in the sector, both processing, Minister of State, and now a TD for Donegal, that I have never witnessed any quantity of blackfish being landed, because the industry are careful enough to ensure that if you landed blackfish, it reduced the value of all of the other fish, so it doesn't happen. But those who are responsible for this now, and it has been pointed out by others, are Norway, Iceland, Faroes, and also the United Kingdom. We sat in this chamber, and we listened attentively to Michel Barnier to tell us the importance of Brexit and the importance of Ireland to remain in the EU, and the loss to the UK of not remaining in Europe. It may have been a loss generally to the UK, but it was a major advantage to the fishing sector that they are now outside the UK. Hundreds of thousands of euros of value of fish as a result of that. I met him here in the dining room afterwards, and I put it to the Commissioner that I was extremely concerned for the future of this sector. And he said to me, you can be absolutely sure that I, as the chief negotiator between Europe and the UK, that fish and trade will be inextricably linked and fish will be protected. I was naive enough, even then, to believe the man. But he obviously had a French hat on rather than a European one, working in the interest of all the European countries. I took the opportunity and I listened to my Donegal colleague, Padraig McLaughlin, naming a number of companies in Europe. And I took an opportunity, and I have the number for a long time, and I rang the office of the Parliament in Holland. I said, I want to speak to them. And I must say, in fairness, they'll come back very quickly, give the email, and I will be expressing my views. But they're in business. They're out to look after their own interests. But I take the view that this is a monopoly. And there should be some European Commission that would look at this, that if a country or a company can go into the other countries and the other end of Europe and into Poland and elsewhere and have a quota that was much greater than many of the larger European states. So monopoly, now that was of course whether it be Parliament, whether it be Van der Plas or Van der Swan, all of whom I knew in a former life. Can I say that as far as the Hague is concerned, there's a misconception about the Hague. The Hague was first introduced in 1976, and of course we remember the Hague as had to be invoked over years, but that was only since 1988. The Hague preferences were included in the total allowable, and the quotas for Ireland until 1988. And since that, of course, they had to be invoked. I remember in 2004, 2006, having to travel to the UK in advance of a council meeting to prevail upon Ben Bradshaw, who had the fisheries portfolio at that time, and had a good relation with them now. But things have changed so much since then. Can I also just point out that the difficulties that we're having with foreign vessels coming into this country. And I want to, in the limited time available to me, I want to demonstrate, and I want the Minister to demonstrate to our European colleagues that Ireland takes its fishing seriously. We take conservation seriously. The government needs to make it clear, that no common control plan will be renewed for Belgium or France in 2026. And they will have to weigh on the piers, harbours, each and every fish that fishermen have to do, the same as our people have to do. It's a common fisheries policy. And Minister, I would ask you, direct as policy that all factory vessels fishing in our waters will be subject to the same CCTV recording as is Ireland. And of course, in addition to that, when our fish are weighed in largely 10 kg boxes or blocks, that they would have to be weighed under and the same regulations on those vessels. But what are they doing? They're putting in 22, 23. So in other words, instead of landing 100%, they're landing 110, 120%. I mean, it's not good enough. They're circumventing the EU rules. So CCTV cameras must be ensure that they're on their vessels as well, and that we have access to those. And remember, as from the 1st of January next, all of the records in our factories have to be maintained for a period of some 6 months. Ireland, as a policy, must stop swapping our kilowatt days to other countries, especially in the whitefish segment, allowing these countries to increase their fishing efforts in our waters. A national policy needs to be put in place that provides better monitoring and oversight of Belgian beamers fishing in the Irish Sea and those fishing scad or horse mackerel in the west coast from Dutch factory ships. These vessels are recording 0 bycatches, and that is bizarre. How can they be recording this? Those are the countries that are overfishing. Ireland needs to progress more conservation of areas, including closures of net frogs, grounds and spawning period. Horse mackerel closure period for spawning needs to be considered to preserve stocks as well. We're not the culprits when it comes to the issues affecting fish stocks. So, but I want also to say, Minister, and refer to it at the start, I'm disappointed that, and it's a question of, is it efficiency or was this done deliberately, to ignore the question that I asked. So I believe, and I think I speak for all of my colleagues on the Fisheries Committee, there should be a full and complete reform of the SFPA as originally required. What's a minor offence in Europe is a criminal offence here. And I came into this House back in 2016 again, and I saw the laying up before the House of a statutory instrument affecting penalty points. I'm not going to go into the detail of it, but let me tell you that the first time in the history of this state and in this House, I pioneered the overturning of that and got it through this House. But of course, my back wasn't out the door when my own party went into government in 2020. And one of the first things that was done, I know that the file was presented to ministers who were there for a short time, unfortunately, and that was Barry Cowan and Minister Derek O'Leary. They didn't deal with it. They wanted to find a political solution. But unfortunately, my own leader, the leader of my party, who was in the intervening period, he was acting as Minister for Fisheries, file under his nose, signed the file and overturned it. And I don't know who'll be here the longest, but whoever is here, I doubt if they will ever see a statutory instrument being overturned the way I pioneered that. It was wrong that it was done, and I can't blame anybody else but those in my own party. So I believe we have to have a new office to engage with the EU Commission. I think that needs to be set up, and I'm recommending that to the Minister. Now, the Minister referred to the establishment of a working group, and I do know that Minister Dooley worked very hard. He made tremendous efforts. He went to meet various ministers in Europe. He contacted other ministers, but he wasn't successful. And those are the very same people who should be seen to help the smaller countries. When you think of the oceans off the coast of Ireland, and they're taking advantage of that. But he's setting up a working group under the auspices of Vision 2030 to develop a framework of support. We've said all along, it's not fish, it's not funding we need, it's fish we need. But we're in that dire situation now that the industry, whether it be producers or processors, whether they be working in the factories, all of those have to be represented. And I also recommended to the Minister that he should, if it's possible, to have the banks involved. Because the banks must now freeze any repayments that the fishermen are unable to pay. It's going to build up with interest, and I think they have a duty to assist. There's enough damage over the years with making monies available to those who possibly shouldn't have got it, but that's in the other sectors. But I think you should do that. And I am glad to hear, Minister, that you have recommended the appointment of a chairman, that all of the sectors will be involved. And let me also say that those who are working in the factories should also be involved in this. Since 2020, and these to give you the facts, because of the Brexit deal, we lost 26% of the value of our quotas just overnight on the 20th of December. And I made reference to Michel Barnier, who was responsible largely for that. But I don't blame Mr. Barnier alone. I blame the government of the day alone. I blame the minister at the time, whether it be Foreign Affairs or whether it be Marine. They should never have allowed that to happen. But they did it in the interest of Mother Ireland. But for the second time, or maybe for the umpteenth time, they threw the fishing sector under the bus. We went into Europe in 1973, and of course over the years we have had major benefits as a result of that, culminating in the opening up of a market of over 500 million to where we could export our goods and services. But who paid the price? The fishing industry paid the price. And the fishing industry is paying the price once more. I believe, Minister, that I know there's a council meeting tomorrow, and I know that all of this is arranged in advance. But I do believe that the Taoiseach, and I've said this before, when he goes to Brussels tomorrow, even though the agenda is set, that he should insist that under any other business, that he raises the issue with his counterparts from all of the European states. He raises this, and this will indicate the importance of it. I've also tabled a question to the Taoiseach to find out who he contacted prior to the fisheries, because he did say that he would make efforts to make contact. I know what Minister Dooley has done. I'll get a reply to a PQ there, but I also am waiting on a reply from the Taoiseach, whom he contacted. Did he contact the Danes, the presidency, and what other countries? Because I do believe if that happened, they may have taken a different attitude. But this blocking minority, and I think it's so unfair that a blocking minority of a few of the larger countries could block us from getting the Hague preference, which was there since '76 and never had to be invoked, because from '76 to '88 it was always included in the TAC, and from '88 onwards. And as I said, I had experience of that in the past. Now, some will say, oh, well, we'll have the presidency next year, we'll review the common fisheries policy. Well, let me tell you, Lascan Corla, we can talk about reviews, but reviews will end up with the same percentage of the cake going to the various countries. Minister, you mentioned this, and let's hope that you put it on the table and we try that. But I've seen reviews, I've seen mid-term reviews, I've seen them come and go, and not any iota of change has been made. So mar focal score, ta has sort of manjesha aisle, con an cash tawak the shaw play, came flame with jay at cost in the history at Tusna Shaktinya, but Bay Muchenya at Cor Bayam Erhan Cash Shaw, her Kun Chanskan the history there. Har ceann na daoine na hiascarí na monarchain na daoine atá ag governance na monarchain agus na daoine eile atá ag brath tionscail na héic bé Virginia a chuinneal súil géir agus ag tóisián tacaí ag don ara stáid Timmy Dooley agus é ag deanú a dhícheal ar ceann an tionscail seo.
Deputy Rose Commonwealth.
Minister, what we've seen over the last few weeks is an absolute abject failure of the common fisheries policy. Even the 1996 Hague preferences have failed. That was the very mechanism that was set up to guarantee Ireland a minimum level of fish to catch in our own waters. That's what it would have meant. But France, Germany, Poland and the Netherlands banded together to ensure that not even a vote could be taken on it. But the truth is, Minister, that Ireland's fishing industry has suffered deaths by 1,000 cuts. I come from Mayo, a huge coastal county. I have seen and watched it over the years, and I've watched it to see, you know, along with the fishing families, to see huge trawlers behave absolutely reckless because they were allowed to do it. They were legally allowed to do it. And then we have the criminalisation of fishermen and fishing families at the same time. So it shouldn't be a surprise to us what has happened here, but it is an absolute shock. It's a shock to the system, and it's a shock that has to be corrected. The truth is, Minister, that the EU has failed Ireland's fishing industry repeatedly, but so has the government. You know, the EU got used of successive governments allowing it to happen over and over again. And as our Sinn Féin's fishing spokesperson, Deputy Pádraig McLaughlin, said earlier, the EU-based corporations allegedly complicit in investing in fleets in third countries and benefiting from inflated quotas, while fishing families and fishing communities have to suffer. We need an absolute radical reset of the fishing industry and of fishing across the board. I want to take the opportunity as well, Minister, to tell you what is happening and to ask you to come up to Mayo to meet with the anglers and the draft net licence holders there. Because what government is attempting to do is to do an absolute blanket ban on fishing. Even if we take, like, the Moy complex, 60 miles of rivers, 12 fisheries, 115 rivers and 20 lakes. I'm asking you, Minister, will you put what you're proposing to do for the coming season on hold, to have proper consultation with the fishermen, with the tourist bodies, and to have a proper impact assessment on what you're proposing to do there? Can you please put it on hold while this consultation takes place to hear the severe impact that this would have? It cannot be allowed to happen. Am I sharing with... yes, am I eating into his time? Right, O'Marco.
Look, the Irish fishing industry is well used to being the whipping boy, and coastal communities are well used to it over many, many years. And right, much of this has been put on the record, but look, you just literally take the statement from the Seafood Ireland Alliance. The Seafood Ireland Alliance says the EU Fisheries Council deal is a betrayal of Ireland's fishing industry. The failure delivers a 94 million hit and threatens the survival of many Irish vessels and seafood businesses. The consequences will be catastrophic. The Alliance says Irish fishing industry will have 57,000 tonnes less quota to fish in 2026 is now at risk. Over 2,300 jobs in coastal communities face immediate danger, and the wider economic impacts could reach 200 million next year. Non-EU states ignored science and inflated their catches. They created this crisis. Ireland fished responsibly, yet we now carry what are proportionately the heaviest losses. Less quota means less fish and less work. Many plants may not survive this blow without raw materials. We now have a situation when our fleet of fishing vessels are left with 28 tonnes of sole to catch in 2026, the south coast of Ireland, when Belgium has 450 tonnes. Once again, as in Brexit, Ireland has been left carrying a burden created by others. This is unjust and shows the European Union in a very bad light in its failure to protect the interests of small member states. And as Deputy Conway Walsh said, Minister, what are you going to do? What we have here is abject failure, whether I'm talking about those that fish out of Dundalk, whether I'm talking about Clogherhead, but we are looking at absolute disaster. This is ground zero, and we need an answer. There has been abject failure by the European Union, and the government needs to stand up, because at this point in time, these people's backs are to the wall, and they need some element of support.
Deputy Brabazon.
I'm sharing some of my time with Deputy Carl Crowe. I want to welcome some of the representatives from the fishing industry who are here in the gallery today as well, particularly John Lynch from Howth. The Fisheries Council meeting, which took place in Brussels last week, can be described as nothing short of a disaster for Ireland's fishing industry. It is extremely important that we put into perspective how much Irish society relies on the fishing industry. More than 15,000 people are working in the seafood sector. There are 101 seafood processors, and industry contributes 1.3 billion to our economy annually. Critically, it provides Irish people with food security. Those who work in our seafood sector, be it on the water itself or in the processing sector on land, ensure that Irish people have reliable and consistent access to food. We cannot underestimate the importance of this, given the current geopolitical climate and the weaponisation of food in some corners of the globe. The outcome of the Fisheries Council places all of this at risk. Fishing organisations estimate that the EU fishing quotas could cost up to 2,300 jobs. Whilst what are these people to do? The fishing industry is all they know. Are they expected to learn a new trade? No longer follow their family's tradition? What will this cost the state, and will these people have no access to an income and must seek assistance from the Department of Social Protection? What destruction will this cause to coastal communities right across Ireland? The industry will have approximately 57,000 tonnes less to fish next year and is facing a quota reduction to the value of 94 million and a possible loss of 200 million when we consider processing, logistics and export. This is simply devastating. We must be honest here and call out the countries who orchestrated this attack on Ireland, and clearly France, Germany, the Netherlands, Poland, Belgium, Latvia and Denmark have their fingerprints all over this orchestrated attack on the Irish fishing industry. These larger countries are attempting to bully Ireland, and we must not let them. Let us not forget these are the countries who have benefited the most from Ireland paying 40% of the transfers to the UK to retain access to UK waters in the aftermath of Brexit. Minister, we must have a return to the Hague preferences urgently, and we must stand up to these countries and to Europe. The European Commission has failed to uphold its obligation to deliver an agreed and balanced outcome, and offered no support to smaller member states such as Ireland, and who have been effectively overpowered by a dominant blocking minority. Minister, I urge you and the Taoiseach to consider formally writing to the Commission, the President of the Council, to restate that the Hague preferences form an integral part of the common fisheries policy. The Hague preferences were designed to provide Ireland with safeguards in the event of declining fish stocks in return for permitting other member states to fish within Ireland's EEZ. That understanding has now been undermined, and Ireland should notify the Commission that, as a consequence, the common fisheries policies will cease to apply from the 1st of January 2026, with Irish waters closed to all states other than the UK from that date. Responsibility for the mackerel dispute rests squarely with Norway, the Faroe Islands, Iceland and Russia, all of whom have unilaterally set mackerel quotas far in excess of their historical entitlements. The Commission has repeatedly failed to address the situation by not leveraging access to EU markets as an effective means of enforcement. Our permanent representation in Brussels also has to stand up and fight for this. We have to properly equip our defence forces so they have the real practical capacity to prevent overfishing. This means ensuring our naval service has the vessels, technology, personnel required to patrol waters effectively, enforce quotas and to hold those who are breaking rules into account. If we are serious about the sustainability of the fishing industry, about protecting fish stocks for future generations, about defending the livelihoods of our coastal communities, then enforcement cannot be an afterthought. Minister, we must consider all of our options here and not allow ourselves to be bullied by a minority group who think they can throw their weight around. The industry will be decimated otherwise. Thousands of jobs are at risk here. We owe it to them to act and to ensure their livelihoods are protected. Thank
you, Concorda. Minister, glad to have the opportunity to contribute to this debate. Just at the outset, I want to acknowledge the huge efforts you made personally and your team in the negotiation field across the last few weeks. I think every effort was made by you personally and your team to try to get a good deal for Ireland. I think what has really happened here essentially is a ganging up of other European countries, and we often talk in this political arena about how there can be paralysis of decision making at the United Nations and in that whole political sphere, but it seems to me at times that certainly when it comes to fishing that there was certainly a ganging up against Irish fishermen the other night, and I don't think the Irish state or you or your department can be faulted for that. But what's at stake here is very serious. If we're to believe the analysis of the last few days following the fallout, up to 1 in 7 jobs in fishing could be lost to this, a 94 million loss and a huge shock to the industry overall. I suppose, Minister, where I want to come in here is that there's several things happening in the sphere of agri-fisheries at the moment. We've had the nitrates derogation extended for a 3-year period. We have a Mercosur deal potentially to be voted on in the coming days. And what I really want to put in context here, because I am no expert in fisheries whatsoever, but I think what really needs to be put in context here is where does this fit overall with all of those different things that are subject to negotiation at this time. There's a real fear amongst the farming community that Ireland, in spite of vociferously saying time and time again they have a whole set of concerns around Mercosur, that Ireland, the position still isn't clear, and there is even some talk that a vote on this could happen. Member States could vote on this by the end of the week. Just to put Mercosur in context, my own county of Clare, 85% of farming in County Clare is suckler beef based. It is beef heartland. Most cattle reared in County Clare are on pasture, as you will know well, Minister, for 7-8 months of the year. Then they're housed and they're fed silage, concentrates, maybe hay. Hay is less common these days. But basically, it's a superior quality of animal. There's Bord Bia checks, there's annual tuberculosis tests, there's genomics. It's a high quality animal. It's a healthy, environmentally produced beef animal that maybe after 2 years will enter the food chain. That contrasts very, very sharply then with the type of animal we're seeing being reared in the South American system, where they're felling rainforests en masse. Artificially creating pasture where it never existed, housing cattle for month upon month, feeding them grain and concentrate, fattening them artificially to get a higher market price. None of that sits right with the idea, or congruently with the idea in the Irish system, where it's a grass-fed animal making its way through the local marts a waning, fattened up, entering the beef chain after 2 years. It's wrong, and under any lens, whether it's the quality of beef, whether it's the environmental lens, that Ireland should even be considering signing up to the Mercosur deal. So that's the point I essentially want to make, Minister, because everything has consequence here. There was a good deal struck for Ireland in the last few days on the Nitrates Directive. Ireland got sold a pup by other European states in terms of fishing quotas, and now we have potentially in a matter of days, or postponed till February, a vote on Mercosur. And I'd really like to hear, and I brought it up under QPL earlier, where's Ireland's position on Mercosur, but in particular, where does it fit with these 3 different negotiated schemes? No doubt they're separate, and people will say they're separate, but that's not how European politics works. Different member states will have their advisors, their ministers, their negotiating teams, horse trading on these, and I fear that given where we've been at with the Nitrates Directive, where the fishery deal ends up landing despite everyone's best efforts, that Mercosur could be something that we're signing up to, and I would hugely caution against it. Thank you, Laskin Gorda. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Deputy Crowe. Deputy Mayor.
Myself and colleagues across the House stood in this chamber 2 short months ago to ask government to start standing up to the EU and demand fairness and justice
for Irish fishing communities. Now, following the recent outcome of the European Union's Fisheries Council, the demand is clearly being put to the test. This outcome is disastrous for our fishing industry, and we need the government to protect our fishermen and coastal communities, particularly those in the West, which is already recognised by the EU as a region that is underdeveloped and lagging behind other parts of Europe. In real terms, we are looking at vessels that could be at sea for less than 10 or 12 days a year, and factories that once worked 3 to 5 months a year may be down to 2 or 3 weeks. Fish processing is a major employer in Galway, particularly in Connemara, and this would have a devastating effect on jobs in an area that is already struggling in terms of employment. Fishers in Galway are looking for their government to expand the quota, and this outcome would do just the opposite. And we cannot afford to take this without a fight, Minister. Ara marzógach mar ara iascrochta agus hosam grotur rosavíl legéni lomhéin agus a dina ella cecho tábhachtach is atá cuasaí iascrochta in Iarthar na Héireann a Connemara agus ar na Hillan amach an gósa freisin. Tá san gomach se uasachta marodé gomach na Haria seo a thulamud ón Aontas Eorpach chutha bhain agus tá se haram gon rialta seo agus gutse ara seasa sús gon Aontas Eorpach ar watha na ceantrachaí atá ag bra ar chósaí iascrochta ar watha na hiascairí iad hain agus a good shaili tá se fíor hábhachtach a ara gníonach tú chulahort gur féidir leat chun an bailach marachdála seo a chosint chomá le an acnámíocht socha atá ag bra ar agus sé sin an acnámíocht ar fud Iarthar na Héireann agus an acnámíocht ar an ggósta freisin. Ara impím ar chulahortaí a gur féidir leat chun cinntiú nach chuirtar na Haria seo bhaim.
Deputy O'Sullivan.
Minister, the EU has failed Ireland's fishing industry repeatedly, and Ireland is once more paying the price for the chronic overfishing of shared stocks by big boats from third countries. And I believe that the recent EU fisheries deal from Brussels is a betrayal of the fishing industry and has been described as something that's catastrophic. We're talking about 2,300 community jobs in coastal communities, including in Arklow and Cortown. These are in immediate danger. The Seafeed Alliance, Ireland Alliance, have estimated a loss of 94 million to our fishing industry, with wider economic impacts reaching up to €200 million by next year. We need a radical reset of the meek approach of the government. I believe that the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach must urgently intervene, make it clear that Ireland will not stand for this. We need to know whether the government will, for once in their lives, actually stand up for Ireland and for Irish interests, and passionately represent the interests of Ireland in the EU, not the other way around, slavishly representing the EU's interests in Ireland. We are an island and a seafaring nation and have been travelling as far away as Iceland for over 1,000 years. However, following last Saturday's Brussels sellout, I believe it's the darkest hour for the Irish fishing industry. I actually do. And the case of, in my own area, Arklow fisherman C.J. Gaffney and his family that have often raised in this bill, this typifies the government's do-nothing approach. A family and their livelihood destroyed. It's been going on for 16 years now, despite us repeatedly advised that there are funds available to compensate them, but that the Irish government must draw them down. 7 successive Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil governments have been repeatedly requested to do so, but simply do not want to draw down these funds. For whatever reason, why, people may ask, I don't know, as it cost us nothing. Is it because it might highlight the lack of interest of previous 7 governments and 7 ministers? I don't know. I mean, I'll leave that for people to decide. But I'm just looking up here behind you at the bronze statues of people who I assume we are supposed to be honouring in this chamber. I'm looking at Cathal Brew up in front of me, Pádraig Pearse, Trasna and Shaw, Tom Clark, Trasna and Shin, Taobh Hirdum, James Connolly. And I'm just wondering, what would they think of an approach that always seems to be about selling Ireland short or selling Ireland out? And Captain Gwilche, Norrick or Fod, Vermagat.
Deputy Collins.
Thank you. Thanks very much indeed, Lasker Corla. And I'd like to welcome representatives of the fishing sector up in the gallery there. I see Patrick Murphy, who I met on Sunday, and others with him there today. And you know, they obviously have the heart of the fishermen at the forefront, and always have had that, and are going through what is a dreadful situation. The last gentleman spoke. He said, I know he didn't mean anything, but he said, a sellout. Sure, we didn't sell it at all. It was taken away from us. If we got something for it, it was something else, but we didn't. A farcical situation that we find ourselves in, and it was, in my view, just heading that way for a long time. Since I came in here, just heading that way. That's 10 years. You know, we're being shut our eye, shutting the blind eye, even the very small things like fuel rebates and things like that were out in Europe, and we were calling for it, would the minister look for it? Not at all. Why bother? Why bother? You know, they like the poor man, and we're letting on to be the weak link in Europe in relation to fishing. And, you know, I was very pleased, Minister, when you were appointed as a Junior Minister for Fisheries. I always see there was huge potential in relation to fishing. And I always felt it was absolutely thrown to the dogs. But I did welcome your appointment, and I do know you were out there fighting your case last week. But I did ask the question, where was the Taoiseach? Where was the Taoiseach and the Senior Minister with you? You can't stand on your own in these incredibly difficult times, when the powers and the might of the big and the rod is hanging over your head. It's impossible to do this on your own, and they were missing in action. That's basically it. And I know you can't agree with me, but that's the facts. The facts are, we've been long enough saying it here. I said it in Brexit when Barnier, and he doesn't deserve to be called his first name here, to be quite honest with you, when he pulled the fast stroke in Brexit on us, and I pleaded with the Taoiseach at the time, pleaded with the Taoiseach at the time, enter into negotiations on behalf of Ireland, the Irish leadership of this country, not throw it over to a Frenchman to look after Irish fishing interests. You know where it is going to go, and we all found out very much. I'd like to also thank the Ceann Comhairle and the Chief Whip for allowing this debate. I sought that debate immediately on Friday night. We sent an email, and in fairness, over the weekend, the Chief Whip and Ceann Comhairle worked towards making sure that there was a debate and giving people a chance. So, Minister, everyone, like I said yesterday to you, even the dogs in the street knows Ireland has always been badly treated by Europe when it comes to the fishermen of Ireland. Deja vu is once again upon us, where the Christmas present from Europe is betrayal of our coastal communities. I was here, Minister, when Michel Barnier gave us his word that Ireland would get a fair deal from the Brexit negotiations. As we know, he was the one who threw us under the bus. I think he's done it again this time. But what we seem to forget is that the government on the day signed up to it, warning that a no deal was worse. But the problem is, for our coastal communities, it couldn't be worse. An island nation rich with fish, fish once swimming up to the rocks all around our island, supporting the thousands of fishing families, boats in every island, and filling coastal piers. This was the picture when we joined Europe in 1973. Our so-called friends in Europe set about in 1976 drafting a plan, this now known as the Common Fishery Policy. They told us we must regulate the fishing fleets of Europe to, guess what, protect these valuable fish stocks. They asked each country to record the fish that every fisherman was catching, whether there was many others were already hoovering up the fish in our waters. We, the Irish, with our seas full of our fish, made it so our fishermen stayed at home, not needing to travel very far to fill our boats, but 12 miles out from our rugged shoreline. Foreign vessels were also fishing and filling their boats and sailing home out of Irish fish grounds with Irish fish. When the figures collected were analysed and set, Ireland had little or nothing in comparison to the visiting fleets, which had it all. They said we would have to be given the opportunity to build and grow. Wasn't that nice of them? So to protect our abundant seas, they set quotas, and this changed to total allowable catches, limiting each fleet to their historic records. They promised us it would ensure we all would have plenty of fish if we followed the rules. Relative stability was created. This introduced for the benefit of coastal communities. Minister, figures are set, percentages are set. They told us only when the number of fish increased will the fishermen get more to catch. But, and this is important, Ireland and England were given an assurance that if the plentiful stocks decreased due to overfishing, we would not suffer the same cuts as those visiting our waters, especially when they had the bigger share to begin with. They called this the Hague preferences, and all agreed this was necessary to ensure once again the relative stability for the island nations who gave access to the other foreign fleets into our sovereign waters. Do stop me if I'm wrong, Minister. This was the reality for 49 years. Yes, 49 years until last Friday. Now Belgium beam trawlers can leave their ports into Irish waters and take home 400 tonnes of black sole, and our fishermen get 28 tonnes. Like I said, déjà vu. English fishermen after Brexit got 99% of Irish sea herring, and we got a miserable 1%. I have some questions, Minister. Will you stand with our Irish fishermen, their families, that go back generations, who have lost loved ones to the sea? Will you stand with those in our coastal communities who earn a living from the fish landed by our hard-working, brave and honest fishermen? Will you challenge this wrong once and for all and put your own people first? Do you and this government even want us to have a fishing fleet going forward? Minister, given that the Hague preferences were formally invoked by Ireland, lawfully blocked by a minority number of 4 member states and resulted in severe quota losses for the Irish fishing communities, will you accept the political responsibility for the outcome of those negotiations and outline what you will do differently to ensure this situation is reversed? Minister, will you confirm you and your officials formally invoked the Hague preferences? Can you tell us who blocked you, the minority of 4 member states, the cost this will befall on our country? What action did you take at Council level once it became clear that Ireland's legal safeguards was being denied? Is it not true foreign countries are already benefiting to the tune of 85% of stock in Ireland's waters? Will this now increase, Minister? Minister, this is what I call theft. The application of the Hague preferences was to prevent a disproportionate impact on Ireland's pelagic and small-scale fleets. Now we know the cuts are even greater. What will you do for our fishermen to stop them from losing their livelihoods and Ireland losing its fish supply? Minister, our party, Independent Ireland, is calling on you and your department to immediately look at socio-economic impact. This will have not just Ireland's seafood industry, but on each category of vessels based on their size and the individual opportunities for the coming year, 2026. Now that it is established, without doubt, Minister, that the common fishery policy has failed in its legal obligations to the people of Ireland, will you seek compensation from Europe for our coastal communities? Most opinion on these stocks, decimated by the fleets pillaging our waters. Do you believe, as I do, Minister, we have the right to retain viable, sustainable fishing industry? Or is it the right of mainland member states to take so much it destroys the resources itself? Minister, my last question relates as to why some countries with so little to lose stood against us. In your meeting with your Polish colleagues, did he give you an explanation as to why, for the first time in 49 years, they chose 2026 to deny our rights to invoke the Hague preferences? And I have very little time. This has to be appealed in every court in our land and in European lands. We have to stand up to them. It's up to you, Minister. It's up to Fianna Fáil. It's up to Fine Gael. It's up to this government to now stand with the Irish fishermen. And if they don't, and if we see that in the next month, they're an absolute abject failure, and they're to blame for this.
Deputy Lawless.
Minister, this has been one of the worst deals in living memory when it comes to the common agricultural or common fisheries policy, Minister. Irish fish are being effectively stolen by the European Union, and that is what's happening. We are on the periphery of Europe. We have ceded so much ground to our counterparts across Europe. 57,000 tonnes of quota will be lost to Irish fishermen next year. It will account for over 2,000 jobs, Minister. And I was very concerned when I heard your statement about going to the National Exchequer in relation to a compensation scheme, because I believe our first priority must be to go back to Europe, initiate legal proceedings, if necessary, into the European Court of Justice to ensure the Hague preferences are guaranteed. We must protect our farmers, we must protect our indigenous sector, and we must protect the coastline, Minister. And I think it is really important that, absolutely a compensation scheme may be necessary, but the first point of call I would urge you
is work across Europe to gain support and issue legal proceedings in relation to this. We cannot accept it. We must not accept it. You know, the idea that Irish fishermen would be better off to register as Belgians or Dutch or Germans or French and fly their flags over our vessels than our own, in our own waters. I spoke to a fisherman yesterday who said he's going to have his vessel docked at harbour while he's watching the Germans and the French come in with their vessels and take our fish and load their articulated trucks back to Europe. That is what is actually happening. That is what has happened last Friday night. And it is unacceptable. We cannot accept this deal, and I would urge you, Minister, to fight for our coastal communities. A 70% reduction in mackerel, 41% reduction in blue whiting, 22% of boar fish as well. And what makes this so egregious is that there was a long-standing agreement, a safeguard, and that safeguard was discarded last Friday night. The same safeguard the government will talk about when it comes to the Mercosur trade deal. We have a safeguard, lads. There's no need to worry. Well, we saw how the safeguard last Friday was disregarded. And that's the fear I have with the Mercosur trade deal as well, Minister. The safeguard, the backstop, is no safeguard whatsoever. In fact, beef prices could fall by almost 50% over a 5-year period, and there be no handbrake pulled in relation to this. So we must reject the deal, Minister. We cannot accept it, and I would ask you to go back to Europe, go back to the European Court of Justice and make sure that we get a fair deal for Irish fishermen in Irish waters. Gurmahagut, Chair.
Deputy O'Murray.
Gurmahagut, Lascan Corla. I want to join colleagues in expressing my deep disappointment at the decision taken by a group of EU member states to block that deployment of the Hague preferences for higher proportional quotas. That decision has left Ireland uniquely exposed to nearly 70% loss in the allowable catch for mackerel in this country, a reduction that had been mitigated by this long-standing and agreed protection mechanism for Ireland. Mackerel is Ireland's most valuable catch, worth 94 million in exports last year to premium European and Asian markets, and this reduction quota will slash that figure by a huge amount, 82 million plus in 1 year, with the combined losses to the wider economy in terms of processing and other activities be considerably higher. I know that catch limits have consistently exceeded levels recommended by conservationists, and action does have to be taken to replenish mackerel stocks in particular. But it is not Irish coastal communities that have caused this devastating reduction. According to NAPA's figures recently, in 1 week alone in 2023, Norwegian vessels caught over 40,000 tonnes of mackerel. 40,000 tonnes of mackerel in 1 week alone. That single week's haul is worth more than Ireland's total allowable catch for all of 2025 and almost 4 times the recommended quota for 2026 under this deal. Very, very big numbers being taken by other states. Ireland will undoubtedly be hit harder by these charges than these other states, yet it is Ireland that pays the price for their unsustainable fishing practices. I know just how important, as you do, Minister, how fishing is for our coastal communities. Howth Harbour in my own constituency, and you visited it with me and you were very welcome there, and you're always welcome to come out. It demonstrates the role this sector plays in sustaining the vibrancy of small, coastal but well-defined coastal communities. Howth is one of 6 big fisheries, as you know, and thanks for your visit, as I mentioned earlier. You saw the thriving local economy supported by the harbour, everything that happens around the harbour, Minister, commercial businesses, the activity in the harbour itself, seafood restaurants and tourism, leisure and all the other activities that are supported by the harbour itself. So communities like Howth will need meaningful supports over the coming months, Minister, to respond appropriately to these challenges. And I welcome your indication that you will bring a memo to Cabinet to start to try and address the fallout of this discussion, at least, while we continue to fight the case abroad. The significant support that we provide to farmers and to the agri-sector, food sector, must be replicated for fisheries. There's no choice, we have to do it. Fisheries are vital to the future of the country and to the communities that rely on them for their livelihoods in so many different ways. Trust, Minister, seems to have disintegrated between Ireland and the EU on fisheries policies. It looks like some of the larger member states have effectively prioritised their Mediterranean fleets and activities and failed to honour that protection mechanism that has been fundamental to the Atlantic-facing Irish fishing industry for so long. It's hard to avoid the conclusion that we're being pushed around by larger member states into accepting outcomes that favour larger fishing nations. You have my full support and my colleagues' full support to continue to fight the cause on this issue for the communities that we represent, and I also encourage you again to bring that memo to Cabinet so that we can get communities supported. Gurmagadara.
Deputy Natasha Newsom-Brennan.
Minister, as you are well aware, our maritime territory is one of the largest in the EU. It is a vast resource, 10 times the size of our land mass. Given this scale, Ireland should be a leader in European fisheries. Our beef and dairy farmers have set the golden standard on the world stage. There is no reason our fishing industry shouldn't be the same. Yet since 1983 Common Fisheries Policy, our coastal communities have been regulated to second-class status within the EU. We have seen preferential treatment granted to other member states. We have watched as third country vessels operate brazenly in our water, often overfishing with little to no consequences. And now we face the latest betrayal, the threat of deeper quota cuts, combined by the blocking of the Hague preference by our so-called EU partners. This is a mechanism designed to protect vulnerable nations like Ireland. Minister, this is not just a policy adjustment. It puts over 2,000 jobs in our coastal communities at immediate risk. The knock-on effect will cripple towns and villages already stretched to their limit by depopulation and economic neglect. What is becoming clear is that Ireland's primary producers are under attack. We see it in the Mercanser deal, a threat to flood our markets with substandard beef, undermining our farmers and the standards of food on our shelves. And we see it here in the calculated move to deny Ireland its fair share and its rightful protections. The spirit of mutual cooperation and respect upon which this EU was founded is being broken. It is time for this government to move beyond polite requests and to take a firm stance.
Minister, we can all agree the decision to vote against Ireland on the Hague preferences by the so-called EU member states is a statement of intent. With a stroke of a pen, they have devastated the Irish fishing industry. Off the coast of my own county of Exerting, Irish vessels are left with 28 tonnes of sole, while Belgium has 450 tonnes. In fact, in 1 week, the Norwegian fleet caught 40,000 tonnes of mackerel, the entire quota allowed for the Irish fleet. Minister, the trend goes on. Fishers are getting a raw deal and an unjust deal here. The facts are in black and white. Number one, the devastating quota cuts, 57,000 tonnes less in 2026, an estimated loss of 200 million a year, and the threat of a loss of 2,300 direct jobs. Number two, the Hague preferences were undermined. And number three, the monopolisation of the fishing industry by the so-called Big Five. The influence they wield in the European Union circles is not questioned, yet they hold more sway than our own Irish government. Has the Minister or the Taoiseach questioned this, or called for an investigation into these nefarious lobbying practices? Will the Minister seek legal advice and legally challenge the dismissal of the 49-year-old Hague preference agreement that protected and recognises Ireland's right to its territorial waters and the fish that's caught there as a natural resource belonging to the Irish people? Surely there is a clear case of custom and practice here. Surely there is a case to bring this before the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague. The Irish fishers accept the scientific findings, but they are rightly infuriated by the inflated quotas given to countries that are not members of the EU. Yet these countries benefit, while our own Irish fleet are the ones paying the ultimate penalties for something they did not do. Minister, the fishers across the country, including my own maritime county of Wexford, want to know, what is Plan B? Is there any Plan B? What life supports are being put in place, and what legal actions, if any, is being taken on the Hague Preference Agreement? And will there be an investigation on how the Big Five are able to influence EU policy? For Margaret.
Deputy Danny Healy-Rae.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm glad to get the opportunity to talk on this very serious matter here this evening, because when you talk about fishermen, you're talking about an awful lot of people, and you're talking about coastal communities and people that depend so much to eke a living, and it's often dangerous and contrary, and people have gone through a lot to put the fleets that they have together. And to think that in some room somewhere with a stroke of a pin that we can destroy up to 2,300 jobs in the fishing industry in our own country. It's one of the more serious things that have happened since I've come up here to Dáil in 2016. And I might be a small bit away from the sea, but not that far, because I have known all my life people like Michael Arpin and all those people that did so much to employ people from Castletownbere all the ways over along and down into Castlevine and back to Dingle. So many people that have given so much to the industry, employed so many people, and to think that this is going to finish us altogether. And I mean, people weren't happy with what was the fishing that we've had, because it's about 3 years since I see a mackerel, and we know for a long time that something's gone wrong, and now this complicates it further, and that people's livelihoods. So what I'm saying to you, ministers, we can't accept this. He'll have to pull out all the stops, whatever it is, and here won't do. He'll have to go over into whatever rooms this is decided in and threaten them with everything. We have more miles of seashore in our little small country. It's one of the biggest industries. It was one of the biggest industries that we had in the country, and it was actually the English taught us how to fish back in the 1600s, and we complained about them a lot about them back over the years, but this is one of the good things that they did. But we would let go, ministers, and that's not satisfactory in their eyes, in my eyes, or anyone's eyes. To think that there'll be foreign vessels fishing off our shores, and that there'll be fellas standing in the seashore looking out at them. That's not fair, ministers, and I'm asking you to ensure that they all combine together, the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach and all the ministers, ensure that whatever veto or whatever he can do is done, because your fate and our fates will be decided in this, if this is going to be the end result of it. And we've had the short straw since we joined the European Union. But this is cause enough for me anyway to say that we'll have to withdraw from a lot of that carry-on if we're going to lose our own fishing waters that are our own, and that we haven't had, since we joined the EU, we haven't had the benefit of them totally like we should have. And we see a demonstration when we were in that other centre during COVID. All the fishing fleets came into up the river, and they gave they represented themselves so correctly and so proper. No one said had the one story. They all had their own different story, and they were very interesting to listen to. But sadly, whatever has happened now has superseded all that, and for the worse. And it's not good enough for people. And you see, when you affect the fishermen, you're affecting so many of coastal communities. Everyone was getting a bit out of it, the shopkeeper, the publican, everyone, and the garage, whatever it was, and fitters and everything. and the processors, the small processors. This is going to be devastation. And to the one thing, ministers, that I was very proud of, going up our village late at night, coming from Castledown Bears, lorries after lorry going up through the village in the dark of night and maybe going down again in the middle of the night. They seem to operate at night because the road is so bad they can see the lights and it's safer for them to travel at night. But we appreciate them for the work they were doing and have been doing diligently and without an error. And it's nothing that Ireland has done or left Europe down in. But they was taken to the cleaners, ministers, and he'll have to, like I say, this is not Christmas Day is coming and it's here in less than a week, but he can't sit down during that. He'll have to ensure that he'll put a strategy in place to teach them a lesson that they can't come into Irish waters. We own them, and that's the starting point. They should only be let in if we let them in. And whatever bit of artillery we have, they should be threatened with it, because tis our property, tis our coastline, and tis our jobs, and tis our people that are being affected. And it's time now that we stood up and take no more of their bull, because that's what they're giving us. They're giving us nothing. And tis begging for everything, begging for the derogation, begging for the Mercosur. And we're entitled to live as well as the Brazilians or any other one that's coming to interfering with our markets. And they're interfering with our commodity here in fish that was cleaned out. And we'll have to stand idly by. That can't happen, ministers. I'm asking you to work together to ensure that it doesn't happen. Those people up here, I welcome those gentlemen up there, Patrick Murphy and the rest of those that are here tonight. They're concerned, and we're all concerned with them. And we'll have to stand with them and ensure we'll have to do something more drastic than we're doing, because we haven't been good enough up till now. That was taken to the cleaners, and I'm asking to put an end to it for once and for all. This is more serious than any other thing that has happened in the last 15 or 20 years, because we were bad enough up until then, but now we're cleaned out altogether. Thank you very much. I'm very upset about this. It's a very serious matter for people that their lives are depending on it.
Thanks, Deputy Ray. Minister Hayden.
Can I thank the deputies for their contributions here this afternoon, and thank Minister Dooley for his contribution earlier in the session, for being here for the entire debate, and for his ongoing stellar work in what has been a really difficult year and a difficult time here. I recognise also the presence of representatives of industry. Thank you for being in Brussels last week. It was good to meet with you over there, but thank you also for your close collaboration, working very closely in particular with Minister Dooley. Has given us the best chance to work together in as well as we can in what has been a really difficult time, as I say. The range and the passion of the contributions made in the Chamber this afternoon, Corla, speaks to the level of importance this issue holds in our rural coastal communities. It's important to remember that Ireland has received 120,000 tonnes of quota to fish for 2026. This is a reduction from last year, obviously, of valuable stocks such as mackerel and nephrops. But we will ensure that this quota is managed carefully. The Quota Management Advisory Committee, which includes representatives of all sectors of the industry, the marine agencies and my department, has already engaged on planning for 2026. Equally, while cognizant of the impact the reduction of quota for important species will have on our fleet, we also need to be conscious of the potential impact of reduced quota on our inshore fleet. The reduction in quotas for pelagic species like mackerel and blue whiting is unlikely to shift additional focus to non-quota stocks in the short term. However, it will have an impact on the price of bait. The sector reports that bait accounts for approximately 20% of inshore vessel expenses. The development of alternative sources of bait are vitally important in supporting the inshore sector's viability. BIM and ATU Galway are working on innovative solutions, including green crab-based bait blocks. Initial trials have shown promising results, with further testing planned in 2026. I know that a common theme of this afternoon's contributions has been the invocation of Ireland's Hague preferences. And we need to be clear, as we were last week, on what the Hague preferences are. To recap, the Hague preference system recognises Ireland's heavy dependency on the stocks in the waters around Ireland and the fact that we have relatively low quota entitlements to these stocks, particularly whitefish, under the common fisheries policy. The system grants Ireland a larger share of certain stocks when the absolute amounts allocated via the relative stability share fall below a certain level. This was to mitigate the low relative stability share Ireland achieved, that was achieved by Ireland's underdeveloped sector based on the track record in the years immediately after the accession in 1973, and considering the substantial additional waters available to the EEC EU when Ireland expanded its EEZ from 1976 onwards. The Hague preferences are based on commitments made in Annex 7 of the Council resolution of the 3rd of November 1976, the Hague Resolution, to take account of the vital needs of communities which were especially dependent on fishing when allocating fishing quotas to each of the Member States. This commitment was later quantified as a specified minimum quantities of quota for certain fish stocks to be allocated to certain fisheries-dependent communities. The regions to which they applied were Ireland and northern parts of the UK. The Hagues are invoked during the annual TAC and quota process. They have to be agreed by Member States at the December Council and are often the subject of difficult negotiations. Following the UK's withdrawal from the EU, Ireland is the only Member State which benefits from these preferences. While the additional quota benefits Irish fishers, it is, of course, it must come from somewhere else. The countries affected by this were Belgium, Denmark, France, Netherlands, Germany, and to a modest extent Poland. However, other than a mackerel, it is a very low impact on Germany and Netherlands. There has been strong opposition from some Member States to the principle of the Hague preferences. These Member States argued that the Hague preferences were taken into account when allocation keys were first established in 1983. With the Common Fisheries Policy Framework Regulation, the Hague preferences are recognised as forming part of relative stability in the allocation of fish stocks between Member States. Ireland has consistently and successfully argued that relative stability has therefore to be applied when taking due account to prior Hague agreement. However, the Hagues were subject of a European Court of Justice judgment in 1998, which convinced some Member States the application of the Hague preferences takes place at the discretion of the Council rather than being an automatic legal entitlement for Ireland. A key question both this afternoon and at the committee yesterday was what legal action will Ireland take in respect of the exclusion of Ireland's Hague preferences from the compromise text. Minister Dooley was quite clear yesterday to the committee, and I echo his view that legal advice will be sought on any and all further actions that may be possible, and we will consider his advice, that advice carefully. However, the more important message from our fishing sector is that they want fish. Fish must be managed sustainably, as when a stock is depleted, it will stay that way unless we take actions to support its regrowth. I know Minister Dooley has outlined the most recent development in relation to total allowable catch of mackerel in the Atlantic, and we will be engaging closely with the EU while it considers its position in light of the recent actions of Norway, the UK, Iceland and the Faroes. Meanwhile, we must recognise that our fishing and seafood sector must be supported through this very difficult time. Having a number of engagements with the sector over the past 2 weeks, both with Taoiseach and in Brussels before Council, I am clear that despite the resilience shown by the sector, a whole-of-government approach is required to support them through this particular challenge. Both I and Minister Dooley have committed to engaging with colleagues across government to assess what framework of supports may be available to the seafood sector, to explore options within the constraints of both the EU and national exchequer funding and the relevant EU and national legislation, and in particular taking account of the constraints that can arise from EU state aid rules for the fishery sector. I have discussed at Cabinet the need to establish a working group under the auspices of our Food Vision 2030 strategy to advance this commitment. A key priority for the Food Vision Seafood Group will be to ensure that a platform of economic, environmental and social sustainability supports are available to the fisheries and seafood processing sectors and their coastal communities. The new group will be chaired by an independent chair and will include representatives from the fishing organisations, aquaculture and seafood processing organisations, both my department and its agencies, and other relevant government departments and agencies. I will, along with Minister Dooley, determine the terms of reference for the Food Vision Seafood Group. We will appoint that independent chair and will request nominations for membership from relevant departments and agencies. It is intended to hold the first meeting of the group in January 2026. The Programme for Government Securing Ireland's Future, Lascam Corla, commits to securing a sustainable future for the fishery sector, while supporting coastal communities that rely on this activity for their livelihood. Both myself, Minister Dooley, will lead the charge on that work, drawing on the support of all government colleagues, and we will work together across government to deliver on this commitment.
statements on fisheries. A message from Shannon Dearden to say Shannon Dearden has passed the National Training Fund Amendment Bill 2025 without amendment. In accordance with the decision today of the House, the Dáil will now suspend until 7 o'clock.